So welcome everybody to this inquiry. The inquiry is being held virtually using Microsoft Teams. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to today's session. I'm Councillor Peter LeBroy, Chairman of this inquiry process. I'm joined by currently Councillor Mike McLenning. We hope other councillors will join us, and we're hoping for Jane Pascoe and also Jim McKenna. We're supported today by David Rodder, our Economic Growth Manager, who is our Technical Officer, and Lynn Davey, our Democratic and Governance Officer, who has oversight of the process. The session is not being held in public, but a recording will be made available on the Council's website for viewing by the public. The objectives from the inquiry terms of reference are as follows: to review the current state of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall, and to consider future economic forecasts if current trends continue, for example, sector mix, economic performance, employment salary levels, population levels, and so on, and to consider the necessary and desirable interactions between the rural economy and local towns in Cornwall. Number two, to consider what support is already available and planned for rural and coastal areas in Cornwall, and to investigate alternative methods of stimulating the economy of rural and coastal areas. And we'll be taking evidence from other parts of the UK and even possibly Europe. And number three, to consider the potential impact of different intervention strategies and to make recommendations how Cornwall Council can contribute and support the development of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. The process consists of a number of recorded evidence gathering sessions supported by organisational sessions and briefing information. This is our fifth, I believe now, recorded evidence gathering session where we're taking evidence from witnesses who have particular knowledge and experience to help us. We value the input of all witnesses who give up their time to take part in our process and thank them very much for their input. With regard to the questioning of our witnesses, the process for each will be the same. Each witness will be asked to briefly introduce themselves, allow approximately 10 to 15 minutes for the expert witness to present their views and position on rural and coastal vitality in Cornwall, and to outline 3 or 4 recommendations they feel would help stimulate rural and coastal areas. Only inquiry panel members may ask questions. Other members are very welcome to attend and observe the proceedings, and I'll give them the opportunity to comment at the end of each witness session. Although if time becomes limited, this may be at the end of the evidence gathering session as a whole. Due to limited time, I'll try to ensure that questions and answers are kept as succinct as possible, particularly as there could be supplementary questions based on responses to other questions. Further written clarification may be sought if necessary. All questions and responses are to come through me as the chairman. We do this, if it's okay, by putting an X in the chat box. That means that I can then keep the right order and invite people to speak when it's appropriate. Once witnesses have finished giving evidence, they are more than welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting as an observer. The evidence from the sessions will be used to support findings and recommendations of the panel. So thank you very much indeed. Panel members will have heard that 5 times now. Ruth, welcome to our group. Thank you very much indeed for attending. We do genuinely appreciate it. I know I read that out in the blurb, but we know your time is valuable. So within the blurb, I said that the process that we're going through is to effectively ask you just to sort of give an introduction and oversight of where you think we are. Approximately 15 minutes. You can be less if you like, but that's a maximum. And then once we've done that, we'll go through the panel members one by one and just have an individual chat with you and just obviously have that level of interaction that perhaps might bring a little bit more detail out or give us more information on stuff that we might feel we need to know a bit more about. So with that, Ruth, thank you very much indeed for coming. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for allowing me to take part in this. I hope that I bring a somewhat unusual perspective because I have a kind of combined role of supporter and developer of businesses in the food and drink industry collectively via my activity with Cornwall Food and Drink, but also through running the Great Cornish Food Store, a challenging business of my own, which involves commercial relationships with many of the businesses in the food and drink industry of Cornwall. It also means I encounter the same highs and lows as other businesses in Cornwall at first hand. And my aim is to bring you a private sector perspective along with a sort of overview of the broader food and drink industry and how I think it relates to your inquiry. So I'll fire away with a few key points about the food and drink industry in the rural and coastal communities of Cornwall. First, I kick off by saying that I think the larger food manufacturers and processors don't tend to be in the rural and coastal areas. You'll be aware of this, I'm sure. Mostly they're in locations more accessible to the A30, a sensible move when you have to get your product in and out of the county, but also this is sometimes driven by the need to be accessible to a larger workforce or different skills. And I use an example here. I'm not going to use examples by name other than this, I think, in this. But if you took a business like Warren's Bakery, who recently had to close their factory in St. Just, that's really an example of a business who didn't do this, stayed in a place where getting ingredients in and products out was about as costly as you could ever get. And they also struggled from that location to get the more advanced management and tech skills required as their business grew. And then with the really sad impact that you all know about that's happened this year. Having said this, I think that some of the exemplars in food processing and wholesaling are those adding value to or distributing farm produce. And many of those do operate in the rural areas because they need to be close to their raw materials. Within the dairy industry in particular, a lot of this growth has occurred over the last 20 years, or so, much of it enabled through European funding. And I know that Catherine later will be talking to you more about that, so I'm not going to dwell on that now. But one recent development I've noticed, in fact, very recent, is that some of even these businesses are now at the stage where their rurality is hampering their productivity. So they're looking to relocate at least the distribution element, possibly more of their business, to an accessible location. And I think that's because one of the realities when you're operating at this level is that margins are scarily tight and every fraction of that counts. So any smart business will be keeping on top of every element of their costs and going to need to consider their distance from the market. It's worth stating, I think, that while the number of large food businesses is minuscule compared to the number of micro and small businesses, and there's actually a noticeable lack of medium-sized businesses in our industry in Cornwall, the vast majority of employment in food and drink is in those few large businesses. But most of the food and drink businesses that do populate the rural and coastal areas tend to be at the other end of the scale in terms of size. This is often then the sole trader, artisan, micro businesses. And there's a good reason for this, I think. At micro business level, you rarely need employees and your markets will be very often local or online. You're not affected then by the adversities of staffing and distribution that large businesses struggle with in rural areas. One thing about these businesses, they're often derided for being what some people call lifestylers, not interested in growth and therefore of little value to the economy. I'd argue that they're critical to the fabric of rural and coastal areas because without them, these areas are at risk of becoming dormitories for people who work elsewhere, retirement areas without the energy of younger generations, or they're turned into second home and holiday let areas. I think these businesses also provide the colour to the industry. They're the people, the personalities, the products that have helped us build Cornwall's reputation for food and drink. But one of the major drawbacks for these businesses is that their markets are often dependent on tourism and therefore highly seasonal. Another characteristic of these smaller rural businesses is that there's huge churn among them. And I think some of this is due to people who move to the countryside with an idea of living the dream, setting up a small food business, maybe with a market garden on a small plot of land or a small, kitchen table food production business, maybe even taking on the local pub, cafe or shop. The typical pattern with those is that after a couple of years, when the novelty has, I can assure you, well and truly worn off and the capital is diminished and the reality of just how much hard, unrelenting graft is needed to generate any real financial return, the reality dawns and people move on to something that's either less demanding or more profitable, or hopefully for them both. I believe there's an important reason why this happens, which is that a lot of those people attempting to do it think that it's easy, and they go into that with no real experience or skills or proper research. And I really can't emphasize enough how wrong that is. Some learn fast and go on to be successful, but those who don't grasp the basic skills of business, let alone the skills of food and drink, for example, knowing their costs or understanding how prices and margins work, what their customers are looking for, or how to produce a consistently good product, are just not going to make it. And I think this is something that plays a big part in holding back growth and development. It's quite possible to wing it when you're working on your own. But as soon as you take on maybe a production assistant or a sales force or a wholesaler to sell your product for you, any flaws and gaps become glaringly obvious. And you might feel that that's just a part of the natural cycle of business and those businesses will fail. But if you think, for example, if every one of Cornwall's rural food and drink businesses became 10% more efficient or productive, or there's 10% less churn, or there was a 10% increase in those seeking and enabled to grow, I think the rural economy and community would be much stronger for it. And I'd hazard a guess that for every business owner who simply doesn't want to grow and is maybe one of those what are called lifestylers, I'd say that there's probably about 5 others who do, but don't feel that they have the skills or the confidence to do so. I really don't think we've made a lot of progress at all on this over the last 20 years. I think the main reason is that the process of upskilling isn't really geared towards the small owner proprietor business, proprietor operator business. And I think, there's talk of business-led skills development, but I've yet to see anything that is really effective along these lines in the industry that I'm working in. I was going to share with you something that we do here at the Great Cornish Food Store in the way we work with suppliers, because I think it's a good example of how that can be a bit different. And the key to this is that we're a place where many local producers aspire to be, and therefore that's a real motivator to them to work with us. But if, for example, a business approaches us to be stocked in the store with a new product, we might not feel that's right for us, but we know that there are things that they can work on. We tell them and we try to find a solution for them or with them. In some cases, that can be as easy as helping them understand how to create a barcode, or how to help them with pricing or branding, or just getting a good tasting product, or to improve its shelf life, something like that. But everyone we do this with tells us that none of their other potential customers ever take that approach as a simply, yes, we'll have it, no, we won't, with them. But the reason it works for us and the reason we make the effort is not only because I'm really interested in it and it's my background, but because we want a better product in the end. We're restricted here by a planning condition, which is really clever of Cornwall Council to do that, to sell only local produce. And it's in our interest to make those products as successful as they can be, because we don't have anywhere else to go for an alternative like other shops do. And then it works for the businesses because they discover that they can improve their sales and operate more profitably. And there are other benefits for them too. There's one business who it's not actually a food business, but it's actually a rural textile business, who we talked to about barcodes and showed them how they could do it and actually how easy it was. And as a result of just making that one move, they're now in one of the major London stores with their textiles. So that was a matter of minutes for us to help that business, and at no cost either. There may be other models out there, but I can't think of any of the formal training initiatives that work in quite such a win-win way. Certainly we found that to be really successful. I'm racing through this, but forgive me. I know I'm on a time limit. Connectivity is something that I know others will have spoken about hampering productivity, so I'm not going to dwell on it because I'm sure it's been covered extensively. But I think one thing to remember about food and drink is that it's a physical thing that needs to get from A to B. So the transport infrastructure is as, or even more important for some people than the broadband speed. And various attempts have been made over the years to coordinate the distribution of food either into, out of, or around Cornwall. And there has been some success, but I think there's a lot more to be done on this, because over time now, the environmental and cost implications of being inefficient in distribution are eventually going to make that uncompetitive and therefore ultimately unsustainable. Just a little note about the differences between rural and coastal communities in our industry. I think it's that the honeypot coastal locations will often benefit from vibrant high streets, even in villages, with a prevalence of artisan food and drink outlets and hospitality businesses. in the rural areas, I think developments and investment in things like cycle trails and farm shops have helped to draw people away from the coast for their leisure. And that's proved useful in developing employment in some of those areas that would otherwise be maybe employment deserts. But I think there's still a very real contrast in that respect between the two, the rural and the coastal. And in some ways, I think rural Cornwall feels a bit like forgotten Cornwall at times comparatively. I was just going to mention COVID briefly, because I know that there's a lot of work going on in other channels about that, but I think it's exposed the vulnerability of the local food and drink supply chain. And for the coastal and rural communities, it's highlighted the fragility of their dependence on hospitality and tourism. The irony there is that it's impacted most severely those who have followed the strategies and the endorsements that people have given to their plans over the years, and particularly the funding strategies that have encouraged them to do just that and go in for the specialty markets and higher added value products. Were actually through COVID, as a result of COVID, those who produce the staples, things like eggs and fresh veg, for home consumption and sell via the supermarkets, are the ones who have fared much better. A more positive note, maybe, is to emphasise that we really mustn't forget the value of our coastal and rural areas in attracting top food and drink players to the county. And I don't mean names like Gordon Ramsay that get bandied about, but here I'm talking about some of the younger, perhaps more adventurous players, maybe not really known about outside the world of food and drink, but very important in the world of food and drink. Many of them have moved here from London and Bristol, both places that are really renowned for their food scene. And I think I'd be correct in saying that they're a little bit more edgy than Cornwall's food scene. The people I'm talking about, people like Tom Adams, that set up Coombs Head Farm near Launceston. You couldn't get more rural than that. And Alex Blewett and his crew from Bristol, you mentioned Bude, set up Electric Bakery in Bude. Another area that I'm conscious has been overlooked in the past in terms of sort of the foodie places of Cornwall. Those kind of things attract real, genuine, valuable national and international PR. It builds kudos and pride in those areas. It attracts people to the job opportunities that are there. And those people who move in bring fresh ideas with them and share them with the people that they're working with in the area. That's all I've got to say. That's my key things, apart from my recommendations. I don't know if you want them now or later.
Yeah, Ruth, I'd save them to the end, if that's okay. And then we'll go through them one by one. And so thank you very much for that. There's a few things in there that obviously chime with me. You mentioned the Electric Bakery just a few seconds ago. And that has been, I hope the owners feel it's a phenomenal success. But from my point of view, the amount of people that mentioned to me, oh, the Electric Bakery, fantastic. We can go down there and get a freshly baked sourdough warm out of the oven on a Saturday morning, and it's beautiful. And they charge a premium for their product. And I have to say, they seem to be doing very well. People are certainly not complaining about price. And I think when you have people demonstrating that you can command a higher price for a premium product, and it is accepted by the community, it does open up people's vision that they might apply those lessons to their own products, which might be entirely different. Doesn't have to be the same, but they realise that premium marketplaces are there for us. Right, okay, so what we'll do, we'll go around the panel, if that's okay, and one by one we'll just have a chat with you. And I think today, ladies first, we're going to go with Councillor Jane Pascoe.
Thank you, Councillor LeBroy. My apologies, Ruth. I actually had to come in late. I was stuck in a cycle trail meeting, which I just picked up your piece about the cycle trails in the rural community. The problem I've got with this one, they want to put it straight through a farmer's stockyard and slurry pit. So I'm afraid that one's going to have to be diverted. So I did miss the beginning part of your presentation. I am very, very sorry. I have heard you before, I think, on the Vitality for Towns inquiry, and right on through the phone rings, which we'll try and ignore. Just typical. Sorry. It's working from home. It's such a hazard these days. Sorry about that. I was just actually picking up about these training initiatives. Now, I go back a long way in my own town. I traded in the high street for 46 years, but I was very, very involved with the Chamber of Commerce. And I remember years and years ago when IT skills were first becoming prominent, it was hands up who's got a computer and who can get onto the internet. And of 150 members back then in Liskeard, which is a very struggling market town, 150 members, just 3 put their hand up. And gradually we did some various schemes and got them trained. But I don't know if it's the case now. What we actually found, and as years went by later, is that they're one-man bands, a lot of these shops, so they're not able to go to some of the training seminars. They're pitched at the wrong time of day and all those sort of things that go forward. So it was interesting to hear that you were sort of talking to them when they came and did their stalls. I thought that was a very good idea, but do you have any suggestions for that? Because there are still people who need to learn about various things so that their products or they're promoting their products or whatever it is they need to have training on, but can't always get that training at the right time. So I wondered what your view on that was.
So I think the key thing is that whatever you're offering has to demonstrate that it's got a real business benefit back from them, that basically presented to them in a way that is much more compelling. That's not actually, you need to go on this training course because then you might learn some skills that we think you have. But yeah, how can my business, to come away from that thinking, how can my business possibly not take part in that? How can my business possibly not listen? So I say here we have the commercial imperative that if they do as we say, or as we suggest, let's say, and we help along the way to find the answers, I think that's also critical, then they will benefit from that. And I think the other thing is that when we are talking to those businesses, we have a level of expertise ourselves that is broad and can help them. They then see us as a trusted friend rather than a trainer as such.
Yes.
And I think that the word training, I've said it before in other scenarios, is I think quite off-putting. It sounds boring, it sounds outdated, it sounds laborious. I actually spoke to somebody here in my offices the other day about some leadership training, and their response to me was, I have sat through so many dull sessions on that in my life that don't do anything at all. I refuse to go on any others. And I think that there are probably other businesses that feel the same. So the quality of, really does the promise need to be good, but the quality of what they're given then needs to actually have some real impact on their business.
That's right, and at a time of day that they can accommodate it. That's the thing as well. I mean, it's better nowadays because we do have online seminars and training, but even so, they haven't got time to sit in front of these for 2 hours if they're serving in their own shops or running their businesses. So no, that's interesting. Thank you. Sorry, that was short, Peter, but I did miss half the first.
No, that's grand, James. I hadn't noticed that you'd come in late, if I'm honest. I probably shouldn't have come to you first, so my apologies.
No, I was really stuck and I couldn't get out. Sorry about that.
Nothing more important than cycle paths. Okay, I'm going to go to Mike McClenning next, but before you speak, Mike, or Councillor Mike McClenning, I should say, it's the first time I'm introducing you. Before you speak, Mike, David Rodder has introduced that he would like to say a couple of words, so we'll bring David in and then go back to Mike.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lebroy. David Rodder, Economic Growth Manager at Cornwall Council. But it's really just picking up on some of the points that Ruth made about the training activity. There has been various approaches to that in the past, and the provider-led model or the business-led model. And one of the ones that we've tried, not currently available, is to put the power in the business. So to give the business the a voucher support, so they can buy the training, to use the term, from whoever they think is the best provider, and that could be an existing training provider. It could be from Ruth in her activity. It could be from a private sector consultant. It could be from whoever. So I think the mix between private provider-led training and business-led training is something we really do need to consider going forward.
Yeah, interesting thought. Thank you, David. I think I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that providing funding and choice to people who are accessing training might be a very powerful way to do it, rather than just giving them what we think they want. Ruth, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would agree. Various things have been tried, and I think it's possibly worth looking at everything and working out why certain things work and why certain other things don't work. But it's got to come back to what's in it for the business. And making them aware of that, and carrot rather than stick.
I think what you were saying, Ruth, is key about making people understand the importance and value to their business of understanding the value to them as operators of their business. And I'm just going to draw a rough parallel here. On our local parish council, which I sit, or town council, which I sit as well, some of the councillors are mature, let's say, and are not used to dealing with IT, and certainly struggle with using online meetings such as this, and they just don't understand where things are on their screen. And I've made an open offer to spend time and sit with any one of the two or three that really struggle, but they don't like to admit they don't know. And I think that's the trouble. We haven't persuaded them of the value of the training that I could give them. But anyway, that's the key, isn't it? Making people actually understand that it is valuable to them.
Yeah. Another thing that I think quite keenly is that businesses need to understand what good looks like. A business might be plodding along thinking it's really successful because it's doing okay, and not actually realizing where it could be doing better. There aren't the benchmarks there that are obvious to them, so that they know how they're faring against others, or what how well they could be doing. So that's another area that could potentially be looked at.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to introduce now Councillor Mike McLenning, please.
Good afternoon, Ruth. My area's forgotten now. St Stephen in Brannell division, which is sort of no man's land in the clay country. Do you know it? Anyway,
Yeah.
Your presentation is music to my ears, because I'm not a technical man about wind turbines, but I spent about 28 years of my career in the media dealing with publishers, retail groups, etc., etc. And just quickly, I mean, used to have publishers phone me up saying, "Oh, I printed 20,000 magazines, Mike. Where can I place them?" And they haven't got a clue. They don't know about wholesalers and retailers and etc., etc. I think with training, you can't teach somebody to sell. I don't believe in all that. I can't. You can't. You've got to have that in you, and I think I can sell and market. And I think training has to be given to people who've got something, but to make it better, like you just mentioned about where their business can improve. They think they're doing okay, but the training with your help would be to make look for other markets. And I think knowing your markets is the things I'm going to tell you, off by heart, but the market is so crucial to where you're going to sell. Are all your products made in Cornwall that you're selling?
Yes.
Right.
Well, when I say all, the planning condition is that at least 75% of the food and drink we sell should be from Cornwall. We reckon about 96% is. The remaining is allowed to come from just the other side of the Tamar in Devon. And okay. we don't.
I've got no problem with that. It's your business and your clients that I'm more interested in. So how difficult is it to get product accepted? It's because you're obviously the marketplace that you're trying to sell into is quite small in times. For it might be what's the word I'm looking for? Niche markets, in the sense of, you're not going to, let's say for instance you want to go into every Waitrose if there were any in Cornwall. There's only one or two, but other outlets you're looking for, companies or local people might not really understand that niche market, So how do you overcome that one? That's, to me, is quite a problem to overcome.
Yeah, I think knowing well, I talked about doing research before you actually start, where is your market going to be? Who is your customer going to be? But not just who is your customer going to be and how many of them are there, how are you going to access them? And I think that David Rodder will probably smile when he hears me say this, but so many businesses have started up over the years without actually understanding that, and also those routes to market have developed to allow a lot of our Cornish businesses to access the market. There's some considerable amount of progress has been made along in that regard over the years to create a local supply chain that allows the producers to actually have access to the right market for them. A lot of the work that I did through Objective 1 was actually to identify the markets as a market analyst. That's my background, to identify the markets and make sure that the products were right for the market and that the supply chains were there to access them. So that, I mean, at the store here, we stock a couple of thousand lines, all Cornish, and we don't have any problem selling any of them.
That's fantastic.
We are discerning. We don't think it does Cornwall any favours to put a product on the shelves if we don't think it's worthy of that. And I think that that's what I've said before. I think that that we work with those suppliers to bring the product up to scratch. Some don't want to work with us. That's fine, but then that conversation doesn't go anywhere now.
Because they think they're not going to get the service because you've got lots of products.
No, I think some we suggest, for example, there could be improvements. There was one business I can think of who had no idea how to price their product for wholesale, and I suggested that I could spend a morning with them, helping them on that. And there was a cost to it, but the cost was going to be £150. I can tell you that supplier will have lost that in a week's trade, carrying on as they were carrying on, but they haven't had to pay it.
Are you selling into the bigger outlets, the multiples?
So no, so as the Great Cornish Food Store, we're selling ourselves. We're next to Waitrose and Truro. I only sell direct to customer.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not a producer of food other than the things we produce here ourselves to sell direct to the customer. But with my other hat on as Cornwall Food and Drink, I would be working with suppliers who will be wanting to access other markets. I have to say the amount of work I do actually with Cornwall Food and Drink, that activity is fairly limited now. I'm running this store.
Okay. Are you doing, forgive my ignorance, are you doing online sales?
Well, as of today, yes. So we've had to reinvent ourselves through COVID. We previously made a very much our point of difference in retail was that our customers would have a very different experience of shopping for food when they came into our store. They would face people at real counters with real expertise and knowledge of their products and have exceptional service levels and all at a very reasonable price. And we said that we weren't going to go online and copy everybody else doing that, because actually I think, I know that the supermarkets at the time even were saying that they didn't make any money going online. Through COVID, we've introduced home deliveries and a kind of click and collect, a very rudimentary click and collect service. And as of today, we're selling a kind of collection of gifts of Cornish food online, because we're putting our toe in the water to see what happens, because we think that we've got to evolve as well. We can see the world is going to be a very different place after this.
Yeah. So just to make this right, you've got sorry for ignorance, because I spend all my life as a counsellor, so my wife goes to the Truro more than me. Yeah. So you've got a shop in Truro. Yeah.
So it's next to Waitrose. You've heard of Waitrose and Truro? So part of the planning consent for the development of the Tregower Park and Ride and the Waitrose store was that 5,000 square feet of retail space is dedicated to the sale of local produce.
Right. And
I basically own and run that. Right. We're joined to a supermarket, the idea being that it enables local people to get, it makes local produce more accessible to the local community by them combining a shop in our store with a shop in the supermarket.
Right.
Okay, Mike, thanks for those questions. I can see that David Rodder has indicated now, so I'm going to bring David in and then go to Jim McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to expand on a point that Ruth made there. So we know there are funding programs and there are funding programs, and whilst absolutely a lot of the businesses that in the food and drink sector have tapped into those over the years, they're very different the way they operate. So I'm hoping Ruth will agree that under previous programs where we were able to support the business with market intelligence, so what's happening with the sales of any given product, are they going up, are they going down, what's the consumer looking for, so we could support them with costs around that. We could support them with new product development costs and those sorts of things to get the product as good as it could possibly be. We could help them with business support to deal with their fundamental business needs. We could put training around them as well to help improve their abilities, but also the abilities of their employees. We could also help them with marketing and business support, so trade shows, supplier events, export opportunities. So at the best we've been able to offer, all those strands that I've just explored were available to a food business. Oh, and capital grants for equipment and buildings and those sorts of things. They weren't as seamless as we would have wanted them to be. The business had to go to lots of different organisations to access them, but they were pretty joined up at one point. Now, fast forward into the current programme, it's capital only. So there's no business, there's not you can go to the job that Ruth used to do back in the day and ask for a market analysis unless you pay for it yourself. There's not the integral business support, there's not the training in the same way. So whilst we still have a funding programme, and hopefully in the future we'll have a funding programme, the point really is what you use that funding for. I think yes, we can. One of the things I've said quite often is today we can help a business to access capital grant to expand the amount of produce that they produce. But what we can't do is put any revenue support to help them sell it, which is a bit counterintuitive. But that's not a local decision. That's not not being political about it. It's not a European rule. It's the way that our current government allows us to use the current European programme. There will hopefully be a replacement for the current European programme under post December of this year, so the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. But the key element in there is what we're allowed to use it for.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, David. And Ruth, glad to see you put 50p in the meter. And I'll introduce Councillor Jim McKenna now.
Ruth, hi. Councillor Jim McKenna representing Penzance, and I was very familiar with warrants because they were my pasty of choice for many years. So David sort of mentioned one or two things I was going to sort of ask you about, but you've particularly mentioned training, which is interesting because I've sort of sat through Objective 1, Convergence and various other things, and it always seemed to me there was almost a mini industry in terms of organisations that bid for that training funding and then produced something which was very homogenous. It seemed more like how many people can we get through with a certificate rather than how much can we add value. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts, particularly in light of shared prosperity, which I guess maybe next year, maybe the year after. But there's bound to be an ESF or the equivalent of an ESF or a training element. So how do you think businesses can best influence the way in which that work is pitched, possibly even sort of provide some of the support required? What would you do to ensure that the people it's supposed to actually help and assist actually have an input into shaping it so that we don't waste more money?
Okay, thank you. I think that businesses actually have been quite vocal in the past, and there are channels where they can express the kind of thing that they would like. I think the problem that you've encountered, and I completely recognise in past programmes, is that it's all about what the target is. So when the target becomes engage with 50 businesses, put on 6 sessions, then the whole focus of those programs is about getting those bums on those seats and not about the quality of what is provided or the impact on those businesses. And until that changes, I think that that isn't going to change. That's the one thing that I think could make so much difference, is that the way the funding programs are set up, or the funding is given out to any providers, should have a very, very different way of measuring the way it's used.
Brilliant. Thank you. And as this is around the sort of relationship between towns and sort of more rural areas and coastal areas, and again looking at Warren's and the mistakes that potentially they made in terms of not modernising, not using technology more effectively, etc. From as someone who represents a coastal town, but it's a reasonable sized town as well, what would you say is, how do you think sort of what might be micro businesses, startup businesses, could be best supported where they have the capacity to expand? Do you think there is sufficient targeting? Do you think there's sufficient available for people who are not just wanting the lifestyle, not just wanting to sort of keep themselves and their family fed, but actually wanting to see this develop? So, let's think about shared prosperity. Let's think about equal opportunities for areas as well as individuals. What do you think could best be done? Maybe what one thing would you change that could help more peripheral areas compete in terms of attracting that sort of business?
Okay. I think the support that is available has to be really professional. It's got to have a level of expertise to it that really has an impact on those businesses in enabling them to develop. I think along with your comments about training, I think some of the business support has been, I'll be honest, mediocre, and therefore been ambitious enough. One of the recommendations I was going to make in a minute is I've written down here that as a county, if we took a more entrepreneurial stance on development, where we were a bit more creative in our ideas, and adventurous and willing to accept a bit of risk, but try things a bit different, I think that we may well, with the right guidance, produce much better results.
Okay, thank you very much. And I listened with interest to what you said. That was fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much indeed, Jim. So Ruth, we need to squeeze your recommendations out of you now, please, if that's okay.
So that was one. In fact, I'll go back to my first one was, I think there should be a programme for the hospitality industry of the future, attracting people to become chefs and take on other jobs in hospitality, or even the business owners of the future. This is something that had been really hard even before COVID, and is going to become even harder now as people witness the terrible impact on that industry. You could argue that maybe we should make our efforts or spend our time actually looking at other industries rather than that one. But I think that while COVID is very relevant to us all now, we don't know what the next crisis is that's going to come along. It might be something, for example, that affects people's confidence in e-commerce. And if we send everybody down that route and only that route, then they're going to come a cropper again. So I think the policy framework needs to encourage the greatest variety of channels within the supply chain, including a really efficient hospitality sector. And then with this, I think we absolutely must include work to make business owners much better employers. Business owners often talk about their hopeless staff, but I think we have some employers who could maybe be much better employers. The second thing is there's something that you focused on in response to what I said earlier, which is upskill the artisans. And the impacts on this, I think, could be improved capacity and efficiency within the small business sector, creating more time, bigger volumes and efficiency savings, but also greater motivation to grow. And that would help in turn fill that gap in medium-sized businesses we've got. And that in turn generates the more higher level job opportunities and careers. And I think here we could potentially look at pooling some of those advanced skills between those businesses even. If you think of things like finance and marketing and HR and maintenance and tech support and all those things that a bigger business needs, they maybe don't all need one person. Maybe that is something that could be investigated there to make that growth more appealing and less risky for them. And I've talked about taking an entrepreneurial stance on development. I think that it's not rash to accept an element of risk. That's what entrepreneurs do, but it creates the development space. It's the way that successful entrepreneurs get a leading edge. I'd like to see food and drink development also take a more rounded approach, and with an understanding that creative economic development can also produce gains, for example, in health and well-being and in education. And I think if we looked at food and drink development in this way, Cornwall could really lead and be a beacon within our industry. I think we become a little bit complacent about our industry here. We know it's got a good reputation, it draws people to the county, it achieves some fantastic media coverage. But I think that's maybe led to policymakers to overlook not only how fragile the industry is underneath the surface, but also what else food and drink could do to help Cornwall achieve its wider ambitions. It's not just a media story and a nice thing. You know, there's all sorts of other things that it could help achieve.
Okay, Ruth, thank you very much indeed. Very kind of you to give us your time. We do appreciate it, and it has been fascinating and a value to us. So thank you. And I can see rounds of applause going on in the background from Mike McLenning and Jim McKenna. Thanks, guys. I'm going to
apologise that I'm not able to stay for the rest, but I look forward to hearing all about it.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Cheerio. Right, we're going to move on now to Catherine Mead, please, who is the owner-director of Linna Dairies Cheese Company. Catherine, the format that we're running in this inquiry session is that we're asking witnesses to come forward with up to 15 minutes. Don't feel you need to fill it all, of just a general background on what your experience is of business and vitality and of the economy in our rural and coastal areas is. And then we'll move on to the panel and give each one of the panel in turn an opportunity just to have a quick chat with you. And then at the very end, we'll sum up by asking you for some recommendations, things that you'd ask us to seriously consider as Cornwall Council to help improve the lot of these areas of Cornwall. So, Catherine, thank you for attending, and we'll go straight on. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, very much, and thank you for inviting me. I think just to give some context of my background, I have been involved with Linna Dairies Cheese Company for the last 25 years and have been the sole owner of Linna Dairies Cheese Company over the last 20. And we make Cornish yard cheese, which we make in a dairy just outside Truro, between Truro and Falmouth. And we supply national retailers, specialist shops, delis, independents, farm shops, and we export to principally Australia, the US, and the Middle East. And our business enjoys incremental growth, but I've always been very focused on sustainable growth. So casting back, and whilst we don't want to dwell too much in the past, we want to look forward, I think it is useful to learn from the past and learn from where we've come from. So we were a small entrepreneurial business, farm-based, very much the kind of business that Ruth was talking about, that started in the early 90s, and you may remember the drive towards encouraging farmers to move into value-added production away from the supply of commodities. And it is my belief that Cornwall as a county, and probably as per the rest of the UK, is not well placed to produce commodity food products. We are very good at value added, and therefore where we produce and we add value to what we have produced, we are exceptionally good. Where we're competing in global markets, whether it's arable horticulture or indeed slightly less so, but dairy and meat and livestock, we struggle. And clearly food and agriculture are a very, very important part of the Cornish economy. Therefore, there was a national drive to encourage value added, and that was something that we were in the right place at the right time and able to do that. And we were very early in being a specialist cheesemaker, of which now, as you are probably aware, there is a proliferation nationwide. So we do have a bit of a sort of advantage of being early to market. And when we started on our journey, we believed that what we needed to do was to just improve our marketing and just to increase the awareness of our brand, and our position in the market would then incrementally grow. And actually, we couldn't have been further from that than we imagined. What we absolutely needed to do was to focus on every aspect of our product. It started from our production and production processes, our use of technology and automation, our consistency of product, and our routes to market, i.e. our logistics, our ability to get to market, our recruitment and retention of staff, the consistent upskilling and development of those staff, and then more recently our ability to compete in a national stroke, in our case, global market. And I would suggest that certainly for food businesses, and maybe less so in some other areas of business in Cornwall, this hasn't actually changed that much. These are still the things that we are needing to do as small businesses as we grow and develop, and we need to keep checking in, dialing into all of those areas. So paramount in that is investment, and ability of to access finance is very, very important. The belief and the faith and the trust in businesses to be able to grow and develop is huge. The ability Ruth talked about earlier, I concur entirely with her views on accessing credible and quality and appropriate skills and training is very important. But we found increasingly that we also need to support our staff on the on their ability to be as much. If we're to be a good employer, our staff need to be good employees, and to be good employees, they need to be able to get to work easily. They need to be proximate. They don't need to be travelling for an hour and a half, whatever a day on very clunky public transport. They need to be able to have some flexibility in their work-life balance, and we need to be able to work with them to do that. So there are a number of different points at which I believe there could be some external support in that. Some of it would be national and others might be more local government. We have benefited as a business inordinately. In fact, but for that, I don't think, but for Objective 1 funding, we would not be here. And I've said that publicly on a number of occasions. However, our £750,000 investment has, I believe, translated into something like £20 million worth of contribution. So the return on that investment, I believe, was significant. However, and as Ruth said, there has to be an element of risk involved in that. So there was, risk taken in our business, and having been part of the Cornwall Agri-Food Council for many years, I know some businesses have equally paid back their contribution times over, and others haven't been as successful, but that is the nature of risk capital. Moving away from our business and our business needs specifically, I believe that the infrastructure in Cornwall is still underfunded to quite a significant extent. I believe if we're going to develop our green agenda, we have to really get behind access to the countryside and all those good things that that represents in travel to work, working, and at leisure. I believe we could make much better use of the sea. There's very little intercommunication, for example, between Penzance, Falmouth, Mevagissey, Foy, upwards to Looe and beyond, and that is an area that we surely could be doing more with, and we could be more ambitious with. And I think that we need to try and review our culture in Cornwall, and the last 8 months has really been proof to this. Is we have an economy that in part, not entirely, but in part is quite limited by dint of the number of people who visit or who are here or are working, sorry, not who visit, who are working here. You know, so contributors to the economy is quite a finite number. And if we are to grow our economy and to grow our opportunity and to be able to grow businesses and to increase wages and all those other aspirations that I believe as business owners we have, we need some critical mass, we need some economy of scale. And so culturally, I think we have to consider our relationship with visitors, and we, I think, are moving from calling them tourists to calling them visitors, which we might even call them guests, you know, which is a very positive statement. And also to people who have second homes here, because we have not shrouded ourselves in glory in recent months in our attitude to people who come and spend here in quite a significant way and to create that critical mass. So and that ties in obviously with our hospitality and the a programme for hospitality and policy going forward with hospitality, which we realise is so critical. And I think the impact of closing it over recent months has been absolutely devastating to our economy. And if we realise how devastating that is, but it's not just because of the not being able to be available to people who are there, here and living here, it's also not being able to offer people from other places that kind of opportunity. So getting behind that and being more positive about it, linking that in with the sea and the access to the countryside and green space, be it public spaces or even farmland and farmland spaces, I think is incredibly important. And then on the final point is on the issue of well-being. There is again, at a national level, much talk about the need for exercise, the need for being outside. We've all been reading about how people have enjoyed growing and being able to, again, to access that green space. This is something that we have in such abundance compared to other places in the country. We can be truly competitive. But we've really got to maximise it and optimise it and not kind of keep it as a hidden secret. We've got to be able to say to those outside of the county, we want you to come and enjoy it. If we're to reduce that tension, I go full square back to infrastructure and how we're going to manage visitor traffic, how we're going to support that through rail links, through air links, and bus and even sea. You know, we've really got to be a bit better at it because we all know that our roads get very, very busy at certain points in the year and we couldn't take much more. So I think that we need, there is a programme of work that sits in supporting new and developing businesses. And there is alongside that a programme that looks at really trying to increase and improve our economy of scale and what we're attractive for and why people want to come and see us and spend money with us, because we absolutely need those people. We can't just export all that we make and produce down here or all our services. We have to try and optimize the amount that we are selling within our own economy.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. There's quite a few interesting points in there for me. Number one that I just want to reflect on very quickly is this principle of value-added production, and that we should try to avoid commoditizing any of our products that we're making here. I absolutely agree with that. And wherever possible, we need to be adding value and making sure that we are maximising the value potential of everything that is produced in Cornwall. And then just to your final point there about your comment that growth is going to require critical mass. It's quite interesting what you're saying. I think you're the first person that appears, and tell me if I've misunderstood you. Are you advocating more people in Cornwall, both in terms of visitors and residential population?
I'm advocating that we look to attract people to Cornwall throughout the year to an optimal number, but not to take it beyond the number that we can manage from an infrastructure point of view. So I think there have been points this year, points in time in this summer, in August, July, August. There certainly were in previous Julys and Augusts when we were absolutely to the gunnels and we could not have had more visitors in because we simply don't have the infrastructure to be able to absorb it. So yes, I would advocate that, having more people, but only if we've got the infrastructure to manage it. Only if we can disperse people across the countryside, across the towns, and not keep people kind of in very tight spaces where you endlessly get bottlenecks. So a much wider, a wider offer than we have now that takes people further and wider. As to residents, you know, it's a personal thing. I know it's very divisive. I know there's a lot of tension around second homeowners. I'm not a believer in people owning second homes in Cornwall at the expense of residents of Cornwall, but I don't believe we should. I believe we should try and redress some of the antipathy that's been expressed towards people who are living here and spending money and contributing to our economy. And by the way, I think could offer a lot more than they're offering even now.
Okay, right, thank you. So I'm going to go to the panel now and get every one of them each in turn to have a chat with you. And I think this time round, I'm going to go to Councillor Mike McLenning first, please.
I thought it was going to be Jim McKenna, but now I wasn't on record. I actually agree, Catherine. Good afternoon to you. Nice to meet you. Good afternoon. More or less with everything you said. I did bring up with the tourist manager about Cornwall. I've been here 14 years, so I'm whatever they call me. I'm a Cornwall councillor, and I look upon my Cornwall council as I did when I worked in London in the media. It's my job, it's my company I'm working for, and I don't differentiate between doing it in Cornwall or doing it in Devon. I'm doing it as my role and I'm employed to do. I feel that, and I brought it up the other day, that I think there's not so lots of, if you like, attractions in Cornwall. I think it's dull, personally. I think the infrastructure is dreadful. We never get proper answers over it. And then I watched the programme on Cornwall, recorded it. I thought it was a very good programme. I saw part one, I think 2 days later, and I can't get around my head, like places like Camborne, with all the lost industry it had. Well, why haven't they been shouting years ago? People are going to tell me they have, but I mean, it's in a programme in 2020 as though it's something terrible, but it's been something terrible for years. I think Cornwall's been very short-sighted, and I think you've also got to, what you're saying is welcome the people to our county. I brought that up. The fact some people might have felt, well, they didn't really want me to come down here after COVID was lifted a bit. So why should I bother coming again? You know, we spend our money and we're all told that a lot of money is spent by tourists. I prefer your word, guests. I think it's a much nicer word. I can't really pick any holes in what you said. There must be some I disagree with, but the majority of it makes total sense, because you're looking to expand your business as well in Cornwall, besides what you're doing elsewhere. I must say your product is not bad, and I've done my history. It was coming from Alan Gray. Was it a 17th century farmer had the recipe? And I think everything you're trying to achieve makes sense in the true, if you like, business world. And I sometimes think if we're going to look at spending money on businesses, I think we've got to weed the ones out that are not worth it. I think we've got to prioritise on businesses who've got a determined project, a business case to grow them. And I think you're hindered again by the things you've mentioned. Transport is dreadful. I live in Coombe, near St Stephen's, you know, and if I try to walk down to the bus stop and walk back, I wouldn't be speaking to you this afternoon because I wouldn't make it. But there's so much that I think isn't good that has the potential to be good, and they're not seeing it. I mean, it's been here for years, and they're not seeing it. To me, nothing has changed. I should come down to Pew for my farm holidays as a kid. So I welcome everything you say and your views totally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm sure a lot of people do come to Cornwall because it hasn't changed, but never mind. We do need to be progressive about these things, don't we? So second up, I'm going to invite Jim McKenna, Councillor Jim McKenna, to have a chat.
Peter, thank you. Catherine, thank you. Councillor Jim McKenna, I represent Penzance, and I'm an avid yarg eater. I go to the Cornish Hen Deli very regularly for your product, so keep up the good work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll ask you about the reality or otherwise of different or the wrong sort of nettles at some point, but can I just ask, in terms of the business representation that has an influence on shaping structural funding, so it'll be shared prosperity next. Do you think there is, open question, do you think there is an overbalance of public sector representation rather than people running businesses?
Gosh, Jim, that's a really difficult question. And the reason why I think it is difficult, because businesses really need to input in what businesses need. It's incredibly important that you get the advice and guidance from businesses that say, these are the specifics of what I need. However, and therefore on that basis, you would say you want maybe a higher balance of business representation. However, I think that in my experience of the of public funding is such that it's so technical, and it's typically very onerous in its requirements, and it requires such tenacity in terms of approaches to central government, to specific departments, and that whole area of monitoring, that I do think you need to have a good public sector representation as well. So I guess you could say you might take 50-50, or you may do something along the lines of setting up a consultation group. So I'm involved at the moment with a group that is an agri-tech fund. In fact, David Rodder's involved in that too. And that's pretty much a business group with some public sector representation, and the private sector element of it is guiding the assessment of the projects that are coming through and looking at the sort of the sense checking of that and the concept of that and what the likely need is, and can bring to it the kind of discussions around, yeah, but I've seen this somewhere else. Isn't this happening in another place? Could we match it? Could we bring these things together? So you get that benefit from the business involvement. I think ultimately the construct is almost, it maybe needs to be more public sector based, but you do need to be able to consult with businesses and ensure that you've got really good, strong steering committees, and perhaps in different sectors. Okay,
so follow-up question then, rather than necessarily alter the sort of balance in terms of decision making, Do you think collectively there's some merit in pushing for a simpler sort of funding arrangements, application process, so that we could get money where it's needed more quickly, and so that perhaps those that don't have a team of people working on grant applications aren't necessarily always at the front of the queue? I'm not going to name names, but do you think it could be easier to access in terms of the way in which applications are made and criteria are sort of made clear?
I think really important. I think that's probably the most important element of it. And so businesses, I think, are absolutely overfaced by the application processes. The Regional Development Growth Fund, the Regional Growth Fund had a really hideous application process with so many steps. Eligibility criteria can be a complete nightmare because it doesn't feel relevant, it doesn't feel appropriate. So somehow creating an interface that doesn't require the business to have to spend, to jump through so many hoops, would, without shadow of a doubt, be advantageous. But you are right in your view that there are a lot of professional grant chasers. Indeed. And perhaps they, as you rightly say, they do get to the front of the queue, and it takes tenacity to really get through those kind of hurdles of grant application. And not many businesses have that resource, that skill, or even that appetite. So I think that the easier that process, if you can have public sector who interface it with checks and basically take some of that risk as far as central government's concerned, so you've de-risked it from central government perspective, you're taking that risk, then I think it becomes much easier to have a slightly more accessible approach to application.
Which I think is what
which
I think is what the smaller and the non-town-based businesses potentially might need. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I think David Rodder, the excellent David Rodder, has wanted to come in now, and he's no doubt got a simple process for us. And I'm not chairing, Pete, so thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. Yes, it was just to inform the members that our proposals for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is what is intended to follow the current European programmes, is about a simpler and cheaper to administer, because there's a cost to it, both in the business in terms of professional support, or even the owner of the business's time themselves. So we're trying to build in as simpler processes as possible there, but there's also a cost to the taxpayer, because the more process you've got, the more administration you need, and that takes money out of the pot that can go back into businesses. So it's not in our gift, unfortunately, but we are lobbying government to try and learn the lessons of the past. Just to pick up Catherine's point about private sector engagement, and again earlier I said that when Ruth was talking to the panel about there are funding programs in terms of how they deliver. One of the experiences that under a previous funding program was the private sector, and Catherine was involved at the time, had task forces, to use the term. So they had a private sector led task force, and there was one for the agri-food sector, and there's one for tourism, and there was one for culture, and there was a raft of them. And they were majority private, in fact completely private sector, I think, apart from probably someone from Duchy College on at the time. And their job was to drive the strategy for how the money was used. So basically, in short, it was write the strategy. They had a team supporting them, or an individual supporting them, who was either employed in an external body or employed in Cornwall Council or Cornwall Development Company at the time. I was one of them. And our job was to go out there and drive projects into the system. So facilitate, to help the business to find their way through the process. So we had private sector involved at the front end. And then there was also private sector involved in the decision-making process about who got grants as well. So again, all funding programs aren't the same, and that's a key message. And what we're trying to feed into government about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute the Objective 1 program was perfect, but equally neither is the current one. There are bits from each of the various rounds that we would, if we had our choice, would adopt in the delivery of a new program to try and deliver what businesses are asking for, which is a simpler and more timely decision-making process. Currently, and Catherine's been through this a number of times and's got the scars to prove it, it's a 6 or 8 or even not at worst 18-month decision-making process, which for businesses is way too slow. The best we've had it is weeks. I think on the Objective 1 program, the average was probably 3 months. That's what we're trying to get back to. But I suppose the word of caution I would have is there's a balance between being too complex and being too easy. Because if it's too easy, the business doesn't think, in my experience, doesn't necessarily think through the wider implications of what they're doing, and they're chasing the grant rather than perhaps using the grant to drive their business forward. And I think there's a fine line between those two. Thank you, Chair.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's if only we knew that we were spreading seed on fertile ground, it would make the whole job of distributing funding of that nature much easier. And I think if you make the application process too easy, there's a danger you just end up dishing out money to whoever wants to apply for it. So it has got to be proved through, and I totally understand that. Catherine, I just want to reflect something that you said fairly on in your piece. And you said that in your very early days, you thought that your marketing effort thought that brand recognition probably would be enough, and that you would grow your business and it would just all automatically click into place. But actually, once you started getting experience under your belt, that you found that marketing was actually really about every facet of your business. And as a marketer, I really paid attention to that point. And I just wondered if, thinking about that sort of commitment to excellence in every part of your business is really what has made your business and you what you are. And perhaps that is a thought that we could sort of build upon a little bit.
Peter, I completely agree. We've adopted a strategy of employer of choice for the last, well, I suppose it really goes back before, I was going to say 5 years, but the last 5 years we've been very, it's been very front and centre of our business strategy and what are the main tenets of employer of choice. But it started probably years ago when we were involved with Investors in People. And Investors in People in its early inception was a very interesting scheme, a very good scheme. And I think it really did raise the bar for a number of businesses because it made you look at absolutely everything. So you were looking, Investors in People was about ensuring your people were better able to do their job, that there was better communication, that there was better leadership, better training to support people to grow, apprenticeship programs and career structures. All of those things were the sort of main tenets of Investors in People. But tell me what they are if they're not investment in your business to make your business grow and develop. I mean, the only thing it doesn't particularly address is perhaps investment in capital investment. But everything else within Investors in People actually ensure better quality, more often, delivered with service in time, and being a really, really good employer. So I think a revisit, and Investors in People lost its way, which was a real shame, and it just became a very heavily paper-based audit system. And I think, I don't even know if Investors in People actually exists anymore. It's probably been superseded, but there may well be something in that whole area that is a program of work, you know, is very, it's very, I hate using the word because it's overused now, but it is very holistic, whole business approach that I think did very well in developing better businesses. And of course, at the time, it was supported by Business Link. And that was also in its day, and it lost its way and it became unfocused. But that combination 20 odd years ago was a really powerful combination of business support. And I don't think many of my colleagues and contemporaries would have not used one or if not both of those two tools available to them. But we don't have anything like that now, which is quite interesting departure. The only thing I would say of both of them, more so Business Link, was towards as it started to fade a bit, the quality of consultant really started to wane. And again, I think Ruth mentioned, we can have any number of consultants, business mentors, help, advice, guidance, you name it. But if it isn't of a quality, it's not worth the paper it's written on. It really isn't. And, we found as a business, I'm afraid we use very few consultants or supporting organisations in county. We typically go out of county to find good quality. And I think you get that there is something to consider in that, is how are we going to access that level of quality? Because the fact of the matter is that the further east you go and the further you go towards larger conurbations or towns, the more people will pay. So if you were a consultant and you were supporting businesses, business support, financial support, administrative support, growth support, you name it, you're going to follow the money. And typically the businesses in Cornwall are not paying as much. Therefore, you go to the next nearest place, which might be Plymouth, or it might be Exeter, or even up to Bristol, because you will go as an individual. So that's something that we've got to really think about, how we transcend that problem, and to think about it. And also having specialist help is so important. But I think that's something that everyone accesses within their own sectors. So my specialist cheese making support comes from France, but that happens to be where the consultant we work with is based. So, we go with it.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so Catherine, I've got a question for you, but I don't want you to answer it right away. I want you to think about it while you have a chat with Jane, if that's okay. And it's come through David Rodder, and he noted at the beginning of that little piece that you were talking a lot about being an employer of choice, and he's asking me to ask you what actually you do to be an employer of choice. But don't answer me now. I'll let you interact with Jane first. So, Councillor Jane Pascoe.
Hello, Catherine. Thank you. Your presentation was really interesting. Now, I believe I'm correct in saying that YARG began its journey quite close to where I am. I'm a councillor in Liskeard West and Dog Walls in South East Cornwall. And I think I heard correctly that your processing unit now has relocated. You're sort of located in Truro. So was there a reason that you moved out of Southeast, further down west and out of Southeast Cornwall? Was it we couldn't accommodate you with the unit or staff skills or transport? And the other thing I wanted to just ask you as well is you made a comment about making more use of the sea. And I wondered if you'd broaden out on that. Was it about the products? Was it about aquaculture, that could be sourced aquaculture, or was it about using the sea as a transport link?
Okay, so in answer to your first question, it was no reflection on Liskeard that we didn't stay in Liskeard. It was a practical decision. So it was the business was originally a joint venture business. And so Cornish YARG, as I think Councillor McLennan mentioned, was originally made by a chap called Alan Gray. Gray is YARG backwards. Alan Gray then went to my former business partners who were at the time on Bobbin Moor, and we formed a joint venture company. I was living down here. I live in Falmouth. And so I was travelling up and down the A30 in the days of the Iron Bridge and all that meant. And then we built here with the benefit of Objective 1, closer to base. And then I still travelled to and from. They then retired and I bought their part of the business. So it wasn't something that we explored. What I would say was that we were up at Upton Cross and Travel Link was impossible. you know, so everybody had to come in a car. Whereas where we are now, it's difficult, but 1 or 2 people do come in on buses from, be it Redruth or Falmouth, but it's not great. So that was, you know, the practical question.
Yeah, I wondered, because Liskeard has always been rather short of employment space and being able to provide larger units for companies that are expanding or small firms that move on. And I wondered if you were perhaps one we'd lost again. We do hemorrhage them quite a lot, and we're trying to rectify that, and we have been for many years. And it just struck me.
Yeah.
I wondered if that was the case. Yes.
Well, we're on a greenfield site, and because we're close to our milk supply. So, you know, we've got a herd of 120 cows, and so we wanted to be close to the milk, and we were, you know, our origins were farm based. I think in my biography it mentioned that I'd worked on the LEP productivity commission, and one of the reoccurring themes was the challenges for businesses to develop in rural settings, and that was again travel, infrastructure, but also planning restrictions, and we had a very difficult time trying to get planning through for this site. It was really challenging. And just by way of anecdote, and it was then, and it was an awfully long time ago, and the person who mentioned it is nowhere, no longer involved with Cornwall Council or any of the areas, but said he'd heard it on very good authority that we were quite likely to make a big profit, and therefore we shouldn't have planning. And that was a really depressing moment for me as a keen supporter of Cornish growth economy and employment. You know, we employ 35 people in a very small local area. That was disparaging, to say the least. But anyway, that was by the by, that was then, and I'm sure that isn't how it is now. So anyway, going on to your second point about, yes. I think there is a whole piece of work that sits around rural productivity, rural investment, and when I say rural, you know, land-based, and what can be developed within those areas of you know, hamlets, small remote villages where you've got parcels of land, and that could be used for, it may be used for added value products in food, but it could equally be used for engineering type products, or typically manufacture, but it could also be services if the broadband links are great. You know, we still hear that clarion cry of broadband in my very remote area is not all it should or could be. So those are definitely areas that could be supported, but in the Productivity Commission we found a lot of respondents saying, I just can't get people to come to work because there are no transport links. So that's a very key area. The sea is more actually recreational, or as much recreational as it is business based. Although I was on a call the other day, a meeting the other day. We were looking at Brexit planning and how we were going to get our cheese over to Europe. And I said, well, we won't send any in January and February because the risk is too great. I mean, it's a perishable product and it doesn't sit under one of the exemptions for fast track transport. And it was put to me that we should go from another port. And actually, when we looked into it, I said, well, that's fine, but I'm not certain going from Plymouth to Roscoff is going to be a really viable transport route for a product like cheese. You're miles from anywhere when you get there. But you know, certainly there could be better transport links, I'm sure, using the sea than we have at the moment, thinking about hubbing and container ships that travel further afield. But, you know, if you were a guest, let's use that word guest, to Cornwall, wouldn't it be great to be able to hop on and off boats and go from Falmouth to Penzance, from Falmouth to Newlyn, to Foy, to Loo, and on a really continuous service? I mean, we have a great service between Falmouth and St Mawes, and it goes back and forth and back and forth, and it's very, very, very popular. But we could be a little bit more ambitious, go a tiny bit further afield than you know, and it's such an amazing natural resource. Why don't we use it? Maybe a little bit more complicated on the North Sea, but I still do on the North Coast, but not impossible. So I just feel it's a really underutilized resource that we have for our visitors and guests.
Yes, that's something actually Councillor Biscoe, who wanted to be on that committee, but this committee didn't. It's something he actually advocates, that we don't use it enough. And I do sail up and down the coast, and it's so beautiful too. I mean, it would be wonderful for visitors.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Jane, for those. So, Catherine, we're now running over time, but it's been absolutely fascinating. And the reason we're running over time is because you're so interesting, and thank you very much for bringing that to us. So, if it's okay, would you try and answer David's questions in what are the practical measures you actually employ to be an employer of choice, and then we'll go on to your recommendations, if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, employer of choice. I think lots of people would think that it automatically go to wages, and wages, of course, has to be part of what we do. But I believe that as an employer of choice, the most important thing that we do is demonstrably show how much we value our staff. And all roads have to come back to value. You know, you, Peter, John, you know, Julie, are getting out of bed every morning and getting up and making sure that you come out to Ponsanooth to start work and spend a day at the dairy 5 days a week. And that's a big commitment from them, and their contribution. I value their contribution, but I think it's really important that they know I value their contribution. And so my presence, being with them, my having conversations with what makes them tick, understanding them, not just going through HR reviews and personnel reviews, but really understanding what matters to them, can make so much difference to the way they work. So, for example, if you work with them and understand them, and they say, do you know what would make a really big difference is if I can pick my children up from school twice a week. It's so easy to address. You can say, you know, yes, you could fill in the flexible work form and everyone can do that when they join, but actually maybe needs change. Perhaps they shouldn't have to ask always. We can offer. If they'd like to be a bit better at something, you know, do we always know that they want to be better at something? Do we know that somebody wants to be top of the list for a certain training course? Do we tell them when we're doing particularly well with the cheese, you know, that we've got a new contract that someone's picked up and said how much they want to supply it, and we've just got, you know, a whole new customer line, and are we sharing the excitement with them? Are we actually getting them to feel part of it? So those are the sort of very practical things about just having that two ways, that you absolutely, I know it sounds a cliche, but you completely break down the us and them and you think about the we. You know, what would I like someone to be thinking about if I was the employee? And then I've always said that our starting wage will be below minimum living wage. We'll always be above that. I'm not going to, I will not put my name to a business that is on minimum wage, living wage, never mind minimum wage. Will always be above that. We'll always offer flexibility and training. And we do quite a lot of things around things like occupational health, so everyone gets access to occupational health, whether it's work-related or non-work related, so that they can all, increasingly it seems quite hard to go and see the doctors. So sometimes at the moment we've been offering, online consultations, so people can just have a quick chat and say, something's bothering me because, and they can have a talk about it and think about how that might be addressed. We do think every year we try and do a new initiative. This year's new initiative was that everyone will have their birthday as a day's holiday, additional day's holiday. We let each department work out their shift patterns. So for example, in production, which is quite hard work, quite physically hard work, the guys have all said, and I'm afraid they are all guys who work in production, they've all said they would prefer to work on 4 10-hour days, and that way they get 3 whole days to kind of chill out and recover and physically get back in shape again. And since we've done that with them, it seems to make such a big difference to their lives. They're feeling much more energetic and refreshed. Conversely, some of the other departments would prefer to just be on a 5-day a week. But we let them box and cox and play it their way and say, we respect your life. We don't expect to take over your life. We want to integrate into your life. So I think it is just treating people as you'd like to be treated yourself, but making sure everyone knows you're doing that, because otherwise it can be hidden. Hope that answers your question, David.
Yeah, I'm sure it did on Dave's behalf. Let me know when you got any jobs going, Catherine. I'll pop down if I can commute from Bude. Right, okay, let's move on now, if we can, to your recommendations, if that's okay.
So my recommendations, I think business support remains really fundamental. It can be a very lonely place when you start a business, and therefore having good quality business support, but and I haven't got any magic answers, but thinking about how we get business support that's of quality. So the kind that I was referring to with Business Link and Investors and People, and how we make that very accessible is key. Tied up in that, I think, is good quality apprenticeship schemes. Never has that been more important. The Kickstart program has obviously upped the bar a little bit with the apprenticeship schemes, but typically they're supported by college-based courses as well, and maybe even some college-based interventions in terms of reviews and looking to see that progress being made. I'm not certain that's as strong as it used to be. I think that has waned, but we need to give absolutely our all to apprenticeships if we're to get our young people to get out of the terrible groove they're likely to find themselves in at the moment. I think our apprenticeship schemes are wanting at the moment, and our approach to that is wanting. I believe that we need to have a policy framework that really looks closely at the absolute optimization of our outdoor space. We're never going to be a county that has can compete with others on, I don't know, sort of the big cinemas, and we'll have our representation, but we're about the outside space. We're about the big green and the big blue spaces that we can really make more of. So we all know that cycling is popular. It's grown, exponentially in popularity in the last few years. So where are our cycle paths, our commuter paths? Where are our cycling routes in town, our electric bikes in town? We surely should be having, other towns and cities have got that. Why in Truro, in Falmouth, in St Austell Liscard, we could have those kind of bike schemes. But also our leisure for mountain bikers and for dirt bike riders. I live in Falmouth. I'm desperate to try and support Falmouth, get the money together for a skate park for young people. That they get out and about and are doing their, and it's a shame that we're still having to do that. Getting people onto farms and integrating them with businesses and providing farms with support to be able to do that, I think addresses some of the access to the countryside. Use, as we talked about earlier, of the sea, both in leisure and in business, in looking at our coastal towns, Newlyn, Penzance, Falmouth, Mevagissey, Looe, and Foy, and really saying, what's the integration between the land and sea, not just places that boats come in and moor up and there's a big divide there, but how can we get that integration? And then finally, I believe actually that we should be supporting businesses to become employers of choice, and that in Cornwall we should embrace that, and that could be something that we are really good at. And then the final point that I had written down was, looking at our culture and the way in which we welcome guests, recognising that as an economy, we need some economy of scale and critical mass. We cannot exist just in our very, limited bubble. Economically, that is.
Okay. Catherine, thank you very much indeed. We've gone over time, as I said, because you've had something to say to us, and it has been fascinating, and we all really appreciate the time that you've given to us. So thank you very much indeed from the panel and from the council. That's great. Absolutely.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. You're very welcome to stay on, but there's no expectation that you do.
Thank you.
Okay, so
I have to keep going on with Christmas production.
Oh, well done. I expect some of it will probably end up on my table. Right.
Good.
So
I do hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you,
Good
Catherine.
luck. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. So we're now going to move on to Jeremy Raffle. Right, so that's goodbyes done. So we're moving on now to Jeremy. Jeremy, welcome to our meeting. I haven't been able to manage to say that to you before. Sorry, we're running a little over time, but the last witness was fascinating, and we couldn't resist just getting the best out of her while she was here.
Absolutely.
Very warm welcome to you, Jeremy. Fascinating subject you're going to talk to us about in terms of mineral production, in particularly lithium, I understand. And so the way that we're running this afternoon and in all these other sessions is we're inviting you to speak for around about 15 minutes or so. No need to use it all up if you don't want to. And then we'll go through the panel one by one just to have a very informal chat with you and try and get the best out of you as a witness, if that's okay. So with that, the floor is yours, Jeremy.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I've been on the whole session, so really fascinating to listen to everybody else. I am not living in Cornwall, so I possibly offer a unique perspective, but my business is entirely Cornish based. We only have one office in our company, Cornish Lithium, and it's in Penryn. We are rapidly expanding that, but I commute down on a regular basis. Now, my background is I'm a mining engineer. I trained at Camborne School of Mines, which I'm very proud of. Obviously, one of the only mining colleges in the UK now, sadly. And even that's under threat. But I then moved on to be in the mining industry myself for a few years, and then became a investment banker, financing mines all over the world. So I ran Deutsche Bank's global mining team and UBS's global mining team, etc. So then in 2016, I was becoming very aware of the electric vehicle revolution that was coming and that will change all of our lives dramatically, and obviously tied in with the renewable energy revolution, moving away from fossil fuels, and realized that was going to involve a lot of metals, particularly lithium, but others as well. And remembered a friend of mine some years earlier to that had mentioned the fact that lithium had been encountered in Cornwall. And that really led to my journey of discovery, which was to understand the geological significance of that, because even though I'm a mining engineer, I'm a very passionate amateur geologist, and really to understand that that could be a major opportunity for Cornwall. And really what's developed is into Cornish Lithium, which I founded in 2016, really to explore the potential of extracting lithium and other metals from Cornwall. And really what we've been doing since that time is acquiring agreements on mineral rights, which are absolutely key. Many people are not aware, but mineral rights in the UK almost uniquely are owned by private individuals, which makes things very complicated, but not impossible. But also integrating the wealth of historical data from Cornish mining over the last many hundreds of years, and also integrating that with satellite data and modern data from LiDAR and modern mapping into a very good picture of what's going on geologically in the county. And why is this important? Because what we've discovered is the opportunity to generate a new minerals industry. And I don't really want to talk about mining so much, because that conjures up all sorts of horrors as a dirty word, potentially. People confuse it with coal. People confuse it with some of the legacies of the past in Cornwall. It's more mineral extraction, and it's mineral extraction in a environmentally friendly way. But the geological structures that host lithium extend from Land's End right the way through to Devon. And even though we've only just started to explore that, the potential is dramatic. So we've secured mineral rights over a very large area, officially 500 square kilometres, but actually much, much larger than that. Now, we recently completed 5 rounds of funding, including one which captured everybody's imagination last month, which was a crowdfund for £5.2 million to further our exploration programs. So we really have strong national support. We had the Secretary of State, Liz Truss, down to our site a couple of months ago, and strong support from Cornwall Council, which we are very, very grateful for, including recently the funding for a new lithium extraction pilot plant at the United Downs site in the centre of Cornwall, in conjunction with Geothermal Engineering, who are developing the first geothermal power plant in the UK, actually. So that's sort of a bit of a background to me and what we're doing, and why is it important? It's vitally important because at the moment, when we move to electric vehicles and battery power storage, and obviously it's great to have solar and wind, but they're interruptible. They're intermittent. They have to be. Power has to be stored in a battery to optimize it, and those batteries contain an enormous amount of lithium. Your Tesla, if you're lucky enough to have one, and I'm not yet, but contains 50 kilograms of lithium, lithium carbonate, and really the Faraday Institute has outlined, which is the government body looking into electric vehicles, has outlined, but by 2035, the UK will need 50 to 60,000 tonnes of lithium carbonate a year, which is about a fifth of the whole global production. So the little old UK is in a real pickle. And in fact, so is Europe, because Europe and the UK produce absolutely zero lithium at the moment. And really, it is a huge issue. And why is it an issue? Because of COVID, because COVID has disrupted supply chains globally, Brexit in our case, and the Chinese, US, and to a certain extent, UK trade war. So supply chains have become fractured, and it really makes a difference to how commodities are sourced or raw materials are sourced, and really that leaves the UK extremely vulnerable, because at the moment we produce 1.6 million vehicles in the UK, All of them will have to transition to being electric. Otherwise, we lose an industry which currently employs 200,000 people directly and 800,000 people indirectly. And really, what we believe, based on the research that we've done so far, is that Cornwall holds the key to the UK's conundrum, which is the sourcing of those raw materials needed for electric vehicles. Maybe not all of it, but certainly some of it. And really that gives the opportunity for Cornwall to capture that supply chain. It's very interesting hearing other speakers talking about capturing that value chain. And does that also give the opportunity for Cornwall to capture other related battery supply chains like battery recycling, because the technology is broadly similar to what we'd be using to extract the lithium from Cornwall? And does it also bring the opportunity to bring battery manufacturing to Cornwall? I don't know, but we can always try and aim for that. So we've completed our initial round of exploration. We recently outlined the fact that at United Downs, in our own drilling and in the deep geothermal drilling, particularly in the deep geothermal drilling, we've encountered grades of lithium or amounts of lithium in that water, which are the highest grade in geothermal waters anywhere in the entire world. So that puts Cornwall firmly on the map and resulted in an enormous amount of incoming traffic asking us about our company from global players. So it's not as high as somewhere like Chile, but Chile is very unique because those waters have been concentrated using solar evaporation for many years. And by the way, just to dispel any rumors that we would be using solar evaporation because that's the way that it's done in Chile, certainly not, because having lived in Cornwall for at the time I was at Cornwall School of Mines and have spent many years recently traveling there and spending time there, there's too much rain, as we all know. So you can't use solar evaporation. So we would be using modern technology. So really what it is modern technology has unlocked this opportunity in many, many ways. One, the methods of extraction didn't exist before. The methods of digitizing old mine records and geology literally did not exist until a few years ago, possibly 5 years ago. And we're using, and people have talked about the use of technology during this session, both Ruth and Catherine talked about that we are using the latest computers that we can get, in fact, building our own bespoke supercomputer to process that data and to integrate it into a usable three-dimensional format. And I'm very proud to say that the company who's helped us do that is based in Camborne. So we have used Cornish contractors whenever we possibly can. It's not always possible, but we are very proud to try and provide as much value add from our business in Cornwall, and all of our employees live in Cornwall. And what we've managed to do in that respect is attract young people to Cornwall who would otherwise have to go and work overseas, young geologists, young geoscientists. We are extremely proud that our gender balance is almost equal, and we are diverse. We're very focused on gender balance and diversity. So really to try and highlight the attractiveness of not only the geological situation in Cornwall, but the career opportunities and the lifestyle opportunities that Cornwall offers. And I think that we really, one of the things we're trying to say is, and I think it's interesting, the Simon Reeves program, which has been referred to a couple of times now, is for me a landmark film that highlights the beauty of Cornwall, the tourist opportunities, but also the fact that the mining potential that still remains. I know that obviously China Clay is still a major employer in the county, but is under significant pressure from the decline in paper usage, printer paper usage, written paper usage. And obviously, I would imagine COVID has made that even worse. But we have highlighted the opportunity of extracting lithium both from geothermal water, which is basically a similar to an oil well. That brings other questions, which I'm happy to answer. Extracting that from a geothermal well, generating heat for power, and generating heat for regional heating schemes and greenhouses, which again have some spin-off benefits, like maybe growing tomatoes, growing peppers here in vertical greenhouses, and also extracting lithium, which is a absolutely foundation metal for the renewable future. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that without lithium, there is no renewable future. And we might as well go back to fossil fuels. So it really is an exciting journey. We're also, particularly me, very, very conscious of the burden that puts on my shoulders for not messing this up and letting people down and not raising expectations too much. And that is very important to us. And I think, so I'm rambling a bit possibly, but I'm trying to stay focused. And I think what I can say about this is real. The grades that we've encountered are very, very high. The other opportunity is also to extract lithium from the same rock that is used for china clay. There is an opportunity to repurpose china clay pits at certain locations for the extraction of lithium as well. That's what we're also looking at. We are about to embark on another round of drilling in a china clay pit in the St Austell region, which could generate a very large number of jobs. And as I said, highly skilled, highly paid jobs, not the traditional mining jobs that were lowly paid. And I kind of very important that we are respectful of the past. In fact, there's a Cornish saying, hats off to the past, coats off to the present. And that's what we're about. We're saying we respect the old traditions of mining and the way it was done. We wouldn't do that anymore. It's be completely different, mineral extraction, but we do respect the traditions. And I think it's part of Cornwall's DNA that mineral extraction has been conducted for 4,000 years in the county or the duchy, and that could continue to really create a new industry which would bring a lot of economic prosperity, a lot of jobs, a lot of technology, and really reversing or certainly helping to offset the decline that Cornwall saw as the minerals industry ran down. It's worth remembering that the china clay industry, I believe, used to employ 30,000 people. It now employs about 750. The mining industry used to employ hundreds of thousands of people, all of whom left and went to Australia or Canada. And along with those people leaving, the capital left and the innovation left. Not entirely, obviously, but in terms of mineral extraction, that innovation and capital left. And what we're hoping to see, and already are seeing, is that reversing and people beginning to say, well, hang on a minute, Cornwall could be a really interesting place to explore for minerals, lithium, for other minerals, including cesium, which is part of 5G networks, and other minerals. But we don't want to let people down in that process. So that's sort of my introduction, and hopefully that's helpful. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. That's fascinating. I think you'd be a very welcome dinner party guest at my table. I think everyone just sit and listen to you. There's three things which I'm going to indulge myself with as chair to ask you. Then I'm going to go to the panel. The first one is, how long do you anticipate having a sort of a ramped up business of some scale going in Cornwall on this? Because obviously it's very early days at this point in time, and I understand entirely that you've had to do a huge amount of background research on this. The second one is, I'm intrigued by the symbiotic business opportunities that you're describing, and I want to make sure that Cornwall certainly doesn't lose sight of any opportunity that may be coming forward on that. And then the final question is a bit of an odd one. We talked in one of the earlier presentations about value-added production, and in the back of my mind, in terms of the commodities that you're producing, if you're producing lithium to effectively what will be ethical, decent, clean standards, do you think there's ever a point where you might be able to command a premium price over and above the commodity value of that for those reasons?
Great. Yep. I've got them written down. Thanks, Peter. So the ramp up is really interesting. Some of the questions we get asked is, what about another product coming along like sodium batteries or hydrogen, or so is it worth bothering with lithium? That is in my view, a question which is trying to kick the can down the road. At the moment, the only technology that we have is lithium ion. If there was any other technology and I'm going to answer your question, it's just a roundabout way of doing it. If there was any technology on the horizon which would replace lithium, Elon Musk would be doing it. They'd be doing it now, and so would Volkswagen, and so would all the other car manufacturers are going for lithium ion. So how long is the ramp up? The ramp up to production from our brine site and from our hard rock site in St Austell, we believe could be as short as 3 years and as long as 5 years. How long would that industry last? The brine side, we believe, could last a long, long time. Our mineral agreements contemplate multiple decades. I won't tell you exactly the number, but it's a long time. And therefore, I think it could be a long living industry, just like mining always has been in Cornwall. I mean, you've got to remember that mineral extraction been going for 4,000 years, and there are lots of minerals in Cornwall that haven't been explored for a long time. And the more we look, the more we find. So really, it is a relatively early stage. We've done a lot of work behind the scenes that people haven't seen, and we are very encouraged by what we see. And I think that the route to production is not possibly as long as some people might think. The symbiotic opportunities are absolutely key, because not only will this produce a lithium from the water, as I said, it will produce a lot of heat. Heat can be used in greenhouses. It's very interesting that greenhouses are also a carbon dioxide sink. It can be used in regional heating schemes. It can be used in a geothermal distillery, as I think possibly some of the councillors will be aware that somebody's planning that. And really opening up a lot of opportunities in Cornwall that haven't been possibly thought about in the past. And it's interesting to hear the tyranny of distance for food production, but the question is, can you grow tomatoes in Cornwall and put them on the railway line up to London? And that's one of the things that we have seen a lot of, a huge amount of encouragement by the amount of infrastructure that at the moment is massively underutilized. For example, the railway line that goes from St Denis to Parr and to Foy, which we are delighted to be, that's there and could be more utilised than it currently is. Could that railway line could the railway infrastructure be used to rail tomatoes or peppers up from a heated greenhouse industry in Cornwall? Why not? And I take on point, all the previous speakers, Ruth and Catherine, mentioned the difficulties of transporting food, and that's, perishable food particularly is very difficult. But tomatoes are not. It really irritates me every time I buy tomatoes from a supermarket and they come from Holland, and those tomatoes are grown with geothermal energy. Let's make no mistake. That's how they heat their greenhouses. And Cornwall is one of the hottest geological parts of the UK. It is easily possible to do that. It just hasn't been done before. So that answers and the other symbiotic opportunities are the production of other metals. We will be producing potash, we'll be producing cesium, we'll be producing rubidium, which are probably metals nobody's heard of here, but cesium is an important part of 5G networks. It's a really interesting metal. And we just don't know, obviously there's a lot of potential for tin, copper. The interesting thing is when we drilled one of our exploratory boreholes for lithium brine, we hit a very large copper deposit, which nobody had ever found before. Can it be extracted? I don't know, but possibly. And then the value added side, will there be a premium price for sustainably, ethically sourced lithium? our project cannot rely on that. We should never rely on anything more than market price. But undoubtedly, I think that the way investors are going at the moment, they will pay a premium because people want to know what's going into their Tesla, what's going into their iPhone, where's it come from? Has it come from, say, the Congo? Has it come from child labour? Or has it come from Cornwall in an ethically produced manner on our own doorstep? And that could give us a premium, but we can't rely on it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Jeremy. So I'm going to now give my panel a chance, and I think I'm going to go with Councillor Jim McKenna first, please.
Peter, thank you. Jeremy, thank you. That was fascinating. I did actually see the Country File piece a couple of months ago, which I wouldn't say first alerted me, but I think it was really good to see that positive coverage in the context of a national programme. So I suspect that probably helped the crowdfund.
It did.
Okay, you've answered one of my questions, which was going to be around scaling up and such. I guess two things really. You talked about 60,000 tonnes being required by about 2025.
2035.
Oh, 2035, apologies. Presumably you would be confident of being a substantive supplier of that amount by that time?
Councillor, that is a question that I guess asked all the time. We 50 to 60,000 tonnes of lithium carbonate is a lot.
Yeah.
From what we've seen in our research now, we could supply a significant portion of that. The press has misquoted me saying we could supply all of it. I never said that. I said significant portion. If you really push me, then there is the geological potential to supply all of it. But I'm not going to say that we could. But the geological potential is outlined in a report in 1987 by the British Geological Survey, which says just how much lithium potential there is, and it's very, very substantial.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
And my second question is probably fairly obvious, I guess, in terms of how intrusive would the mining be? Are you looking to, where possible, use existing former mine sites and such, or is it going to sort of involve other things as well, other sites as well? I'm not taking a view on that. I'm just asking the question.
No, I understand. So one thing I'd like to sort of dispel before we even get any further with that is that we certainly would not be using former mine sites. The former mines are nothing to do with what we're doing at the moment. We're not trying to reopen mines like South Crofty. We're not trying to extract water from old mines. The mines identified the issue of lithium, or the lithium in the water. They're no more use to us than that. So no, we would not be going into old mines because there's an awful lot of environmental issues with that. When we say mining, there are two ways we would be mining. One would be extracting water via a borehole, very similar to the geothermal boreholes at United Downs are very deep versions of what we would be doing. So we've drilled 2,000-meter deep boreholes. We would be extracting water from those. We would suck the water up, put it through a processing plant, the same size as maybe a small supermarket, to give you an illustration, a modern building. It would not be any environmental impact apart from drilling a hole into the ground. And then the water would be returned underground after it's been processed, and all that would be taken out is the lithium. And if you're interested in researching that further, I would urge you to look at a company called Lilac Solutions, which is a US company, private company, which has recently been funded by a company called Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is funded by Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, all the people who care about environmental issues. And so by definition, those guys would not be funding a technology that is environmentally damaging. So we are very concerned about that. The other extraction method would be repurposing former china clay pits where the geology is suitable. So that's the only time where we would be reutilizing old mines, but they would be China clay pits, and to a certain extent, potentially cleaning that up rather than creating significant additional impact, and using existing facilities which are no longer needed by the China clay industry. So that's why I refer to the amount of infrastructure that's in Cornwall that is almost undiscovered. I mean, we did not know about the railway line that goes from St Denis to Foy until about 3 months ago. But it's really amazing find. But it's there, it's still operating, it's great, amazing. Yeah,
Brilliant.
so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for those questions, Jim. I'm going to come to Jane Pascoe next, Councillor Jane Pascoe. But just before you do come in, Jane, I see that Stu Anderson has joined us. Stu, we've had some really fascinating witnesses this afternoon, and we're running probably between 5 and 10 minutes late. So I hope you're okay with that, and my apologies for doing so. But just want to let you know right now that that's where we are.
No problem. That's absolutely fine. I'm here, so I won't go away.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it. Okay, so Councillor Jane Pascoe.
Jeremy, that was absolutely fascinating for me too, and it was a sharp learning curve for me. So forgive me, and it didn't ought to be, because my son went to the Camborne Schools and Mines as well.
Okay.
So forgive me if some of my questions do seem a bit naive, but it really is interesting. The first thing I was going to ask you, the process of drilling down, bringing up the water, extracting the lithium, is that a very expensive process? And so therefore, would the end product be affordable and manageable, so that would work? Would that work? The other thing is, I was interested to hear you talk about the Foy Railway, which I do know about, and the repurposing of the Imres pits for various works. So, and the tomatoes and the railway coming into the port. So I'm sort of thinking wildly ahead, because I'm always keen. As again, I'm going to mention Paul Burt Biscoe, who hoped to have been here on this committee, is that we don't use our ports enough. And I'm thinking of all these wonderful tomatoes you're going to grow. Is this going to be an opportunity of getting them to ports and exporting them as well? And is this a sign that you may be wanting to work together with Imres maybe in the future? Would that be a way of going forward and bringing your projects further on? The other thing I was going to ask is the number of employees. I was interested to hear that they all live in Cornwall. That's really good news. And the skills pool that are you able to employ from people in Cornwall, or are we importing those people? Are you having to import those people into the county?
Okay. Right. So let's ask. The first question was, is it going to be affordable lithium? Is the cost going to be prohibitively high? Absolutely not. I don't think so. I think we can, from evidence from similar operations in California, where they're extracting lithium or trying to extract lithium from geothermal water, the costs of production are well within the cost curve of current producers and well below the current lithium price. So I think it'll be an economic exercise, and we're obviously working on that very, very hard at the moment. We're building our financial models, but there have been no red flags yet that we would need a premium, that we would be uncompetitive. But those we are relatively early days on that. But one thing that really, really helps is having the highest grade lithium in geothermal waters anywhere in the world, and that is more than anything else. And obviously the Country File program did help us on our crowdfund, but the most important thing for our crowdfund was the presence of the highest grade lithium in geothermal waters anywhere in the world. That is something that Cornwall should be justly proud of, and that more than anything else highlights the fact that we should be able to produce it economically and affordably. And the same thing from our repurposed China clay pits. everything we've seen so far indicates that we've done a lot of test work and paid a lot of money for that, both in Cornwall and in Australia, is very, very encouraging. So we think that will be possible. The Foy railway thing, so the repurposing of railways, that we don't intend to grow the tomatoes, let's be clear. So that would be encouraging other people to set up vertical greenhouses, and similar to the geothermal distillery, that we might provide the heat, we might provide the water, we might provide some of the nutrients from that water, but we would not aspire to be the tomato grower. We would aspire to be a company that highlights the opportunities and encourages others to do it. It's not part of our business plan to be growing tomatoes, although I would love not to buy tomatoes from the Netherlands. I'd like to buy them from Cornwall. I know there are some grown in Cornwall, but we think that it really could be a great opportunity to reinvent the food industry, or to augment the food industry in Cornwall. So the fourth question you asked was, am I writing so?
The number of employees.
Oh yes, okay. Yeah.
And did we have the skills pool here for you to be able to employ them, or are we having to? Are you having to import them from further afield to bring them in?
So far, Councillor, we have 15 employees. As I said, the gender balance is pretty much equal, which is, we're particularly proud of, given it's a geological industry that mainly attracts men in the past. They're all young. Our average age probably is 32. Most of them, not all of them, have trained at the School of Mines, either their primary or secondary degree, and so are familiar with Cornwall. But most of them, so we've probably got 50% Cornish employees, and others have been attracted into the county, which both statistics I'm proud of, because to attract people to come and live in Cornwall is great, and to keep people who've grown up in the county and are able to stay is also amazing, because with those people would have had to move. So I think we've never ever had a problem attracting employees. We have never really had to extensively advertise for people. They've been attracted to come for the work-life balance. So that's been great. And then the IMRIS question, a very good question. I think it's fair to say that we have an excellent relationship with IMRIS, excellent relationship with IMRIS, and we nurture that very carefully, because we don't want to put a foot wrong. And I think the potential of working with them is something that we're very keen on. There's some stuff that may come out later in the year on that, so we're pursuing that actively. So yes, and some more amazing news which I can't share on this channel, which will come out later this year as well, about another major minerals owner, and it's not the Duchy, so somebody else who will be. We have a good relationship with the Duchy, but it's not them. So yes, that's it. I hope that answers all your questions.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that. Sorry they were all a bit muddled.
That's great, fine.
Okay,
fine.
so thanks, Jane, for those questions, and Councillor Mike McLenning.
I think my colleague Jane undersold herself, because her questions were damn good, I thought, and this is someone who got seen me first year at grammar school on chemistry and physics. So with lithium, so my questions might be a bit naive as well, more naive. How did you know lithium was an answer to this? When was that discovered to think, oh, this is the answer to many future problems?
Mm-hmm. Councillor, lithium, I'll answer that in two ways. One is that the lithium-ion battery was first invented in the UK in about 1982. It was commercialised by Sony, and in your electric drill, your cell phone, there is a small electric lithium-ion battery. It really, the potential for electric vehicles was first really pioneered by Elon Musk and Tesla, and then that spread to Volkswagen and virtually, well, all automobile manufacturers are now transitioning to lithium-ion batteries. There is a potential to put hydrogen in vehicles as well, but that's mainly heavy-haul trucks, not passenger cars. And so really, it's going to become a major part of our lives. And is that important? Well, obviously, yes. And the UK not having any supply of lithium at the moment is a problem. And if we hadn't got the right geology, then we would be up the creek without a paddle, let's put it that way. And that's fine, but we have got the right geology, and we have got the right geology in Cornwall. We got some government funding to assess the whole of the UK geology for lithium, and by far the best place for lithium geology is Cornwall. In fact, it's possibly the only real viable place for lithium. And why in Cornwall, this may surprise you to know that lithium was first discovered and identified in 1864 in Cornish mines. It's been known about since that time. It was sampled for right up until South Crofty shut in 1998, and we have over 100 records of lithium in water that was encountered by the Cornish mines. It wasn't the mines weren't mining for Cornwall. It was just that they hit that water, they analysed it, and found it was contained lithium. So it's nothing new. And also, there's a paper written in 1987 by the British Geological Survey which highlights the potential of lithium in the St Austell area in rock. So it's just, all I did was connect the dots. Being a mining engineer, being a metals analyst, being somebody who looks at the metal trends globally, I connected the dots to what could be a major new industry for Cornwall.
Brilliant. Your original sort of, if I call it crowdfunding, was called something else, wasn't it? You wanted to try and achieve 1.5 and you got 5.2 million. With the money you had coming in to support your venture, I'm using that word nicely, are you getting any income at all? Is there anything going on that's bringing in money in for you as a business?
Well, that's a good. We're not so. Mineral exploration businesses are not traditional businesses in almost any. We are akin to a tech startup. Well, we're not a startup really anymore. We're akin to a technology company, and part of our business is indeed technology. We're developing a lot of techniques together with satellite catapult to explore for minerals. We're using all sorts of techniques, which are we have got some revenue from consulting work that we did. But really, it's not an income-generating business at this stage. It relies on investments. Hence, the crowdfund was the right way to go. It was important just to make one point, is that the crowdfunding platform we used is regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. I was regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority when I was an investment banker. It's very important that we did this properly and that we warned people who were investing that that the risks that were accompanied mineral exploration.
Okay, last question from me. So there you were sitting as an investment banker in a pretty sound and an exciting job and well-paid job. Is it a gamble?
Mike, absolutely not. It's not a gamble. It was a decision to leave a extremely highly paid job and to do something which I believed 100% could work. And also, it's very important that I am trying to do so. I'm not trying to get rich here. I think it's very important to say that. It'd be nice if I did, but it's also very important that this is for Cornwall, to try and repay in some way the mining education that I got that started off my career. That sounds very altruistic, and to a certain extent it is, but it's certainly not a gamble. It's a very, very informed head decision along with a heart decision because of the area that I loved when I did my degree.
Okay. Thank you for honest answers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for those questions, Mike. There's a sort of quite a humanist approach there, so that's really interesting to explore that. Jeremy, absolutely fascinating. I wish I could spend a few more hours with you, to be quite honest, but there we are. We need to begin to think about winding it up and moving on to Stu Anderson. But can we squeeze some suggested interventions that Cornwall Council could consider from you?
Yeah, very quickly. By the way, if all councillors are welcome to come into our office, obviously COVID permitting, where we have welcomed many people from the local community to tell you directly what we're doing, and you can see the models, you can meet the staff, you can everything. So really, what would I say to us very quickly? I'd say openness to new ideas, not just to associate what we were doing with the old industry, which has got bad connotations. We are very driven by ESG, which are 3 words rather than 1, environment being the first one. And the hats off to the past, coats off to the future attitude that the council will embrace with due caution what we're trying to do. And to recognise the potential for the symbiotic industries that this could generate, as we've discussed, and to really highlight to school children the potential of the rock beneath their feet and the geoscience opportunities that could stop them simply thinking that they have to go out of the county. And really another one, which is a personal request, is that the council tries to stop the Camborne School of Mines losing its mining education that at the moment has been proposed by the University of Exeter by stealth, that they're going to shut down the mining engineering course. That is a personal horror story of mine, that right at this juncture when we need these minerals, the minerals that finance, that enable the renewable future, that Cornwall or the University of Exeter plays the biggest own goal ever and shuts down the mining engineering course. And really the other thing is to a connectivity map of the infrastructure that it does exist in Cornwall and could facilitate new industry and new investors to come in and see what's available. And one other thing is the grant application. We haven't really spent much time applying for grants from the council, but we have spent a lot of time applying for grants from Innovate UK, which are immensely time consuming and costly, as you already highlighted, to make that process easier by possibly having an interview first before you even bother applying, to say this is either suitable or not suitable, don't bother, would be a very effective way of us not wasting an enormous amount of time and time that we would be better off getting on with our business.
Okay, so Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. If you're ever open, do give me a knock.
Will do. I'd be love to. Yeah. Okay.
And it's very kind of you to give us your time. We know that the time of all of our expert witnesses is incredibly valuable to them, and most of them are involved in the private sector. So thank you very much indeed. Absolutely appreciated. And we normally seem to be giving a little round of applause for everyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Jeremy, thank you. Much appreciated.
Cheers. Right.
Okay, so we will move on to Stu Anderson, and my apologies, Stu, that we've had a series of incredibly interesting and very supportive and people that have been giving us an awful lot to talk about this afternoon. So we are running 15 minutes late. How we're doing this is we're giving you sort of 15 minutes or so. Don't feel you have to use it all by any means, to just give your interpretation of how rural and coastal areas are doing in Cornwall. And then we'll go through the panel one by one, just have a fairly informal chat. Obviously, as you observed that we did with Jeremy Rathel just a minute ago. So with that, a very warm welcome. Thank you for coming, and the floor's yours, Stu.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, maybe if I just sort of start to sort of highlight what the Growth and the Skills Hub does to sort of from a base level, and then we can talk about some of the things that we've found and the operation, and maybe just some thoughts around business support generally. I'm probably not going to be as interesting as the others, but we'll see. I'll try. So the growth hub is it's government policy. So all the 38 LEP areas in England have a growth hub. They're kind of they are LEP led, but funded in a whole variety of ways. So it's central policy from BEIS, from the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy. But really, it's the core function is kind of locally led business support. So depending on where the area is, the mix of funding, the ask that's in that area and the unique business population, that's how growth hubs are shaped. So in Cornwall, we were actually one of the last growth hubs to start. Quite a lot of work went in terms nationally of sort of pilots, testing the water with what they were. We started in 2016. Initially with the Growth Hub, which was an ERDF funded project for phase 1. That was joined about a year and a half later by the Skills Hub, which is ESF funded, so both European funded. That also comes under my remit, and even though separate funding regimes, we were very keen to make sure the two were aligned. They ran alongside each other and shared things like a central database, a central CRM. So to all intents and purposes, a business ringing in, needing support, we just triaged them at the point on the telephone and decided which way they went. Central focus of growth hubs is really the hub of all business support. So absolutely key is that we just have single point of contact in terms of a phone number. I mean, we have multiple routes people can enter these days with social media, web chat, that type of thing. But we talk to them, we have an initial triage conversation, and then we have a longer conversation with them, typically around 3 hours time for the growth hub. It's about 7 hours time actually for the skills hub. And we broker in the relevant support. That support can be local, one of the many business support projects in Cornwall. It can be national. Innovate UK was mentioned there, so it could be people like that. It really could be anything. In some cases, it will be private sector support, although we're impartial, so we help people through the process of choosing. But the central sort of focus of what we do is provide support for people to grow. So we make those referrals. It's about hiding the wiring. So we know that businesses are very time poor. They don't access business support a lot of the time because of that. So we do the legwork for them. And that's the same for all growth hubs around the country. Things have moved on a lot since the start of the growth hubs. We now, for example, Cornwall, we are the cluster lead for Heart of the Southwest and Dorset, whereas we have a weekly conversation with BEIS at a cluster level, so 10 clusters around the country. We lead that. And we've attracted various bits of additional funding through central government, through BEIS, for some work, for example, on COVID. We got an additional amount of funding for that, and also coming up, we've got some additional funding to work with businesses around EU exit, and we've just been working with more ERDF funds for a Kickstart grant scheme to help businesses pivot really as a result of COVID, to help them kind of change their operation. So government is very keen on growth hubs. And the more time goes on, the more you can see there's more coming our way, if you like, because they're seeing the real value of them in terms of very fleet of foot, very swift delivery, but very much have the finger on the pulse in the local area. So some of the things that we've found over the past kind of 4 years going through this operation, really kind of interesting. So we started off in phase 1 of the growth hub. We're currently in phase 2. But we started off having a look at the picture of business support generally, which in most places it's very fragmented. Particularly, I think that's the case in Cornwall. Very fragmented, lots of projects, lots of things going on, and businesses are confused by that. And there's been a business support simplification process at central government level for quite a long time, cutting down the number of sort of support mechanisms to be a little bit more coherent, or a lot more coherent, I should say, for businesses, and growth hubs were part of that. So we started doing something quite interesting, which was working in a number of towns across Cornwall, and we developed something called, it was deliberately provocative, called the Town Takeover, where we would go into towns, and for a whole day we would take the whole team and we'd talk to businesses and kind of get under the skin of what was going on. Would involve local partners, local chamber of commerces, in some cases local members were involved, and really that was to really find out what was going on at the base level. And it was very clear to us that one of the real issues that we could find out, and you know, we went to places deliberately where support had been quite silent. So, you know, the extremities, the further you get from sort of Truro area, so we were going up to places like Bude, Liskeard, so that's, you know, so all extremities of Cornwall, and we found that in most of these places support was very silent. So not only did businesses very often not realize there was business support available, but they didn't really realize they actually needed it. So it was quite clear to us that the marketing effort wasn't around, hey, with the Growth Hub, come and talk to us about business support. It was actually convincing businesses that they need support. And it sounds quite strange to say that, but actually a lot of growth hubs have found exactly the same. And the penetration into the market is dependent on a business being receptive to support. So when we're looking at supporting, rural businesses, coastal businesses, we really have a good idea of what we need to do to actually link them with support. Because when businesses link with support and are receptive to support, it actually has quite a big impact on not necessarily their growth, but certainly on their productivity. Another thing that we found out that is not particularly unique to Cornwall, this happens in other areas, but I think it's more prevalent in areas like Cornwall and Cumbria actually, is that a lot of businesses don't actually want to grow. So the focus of business support tends to be around growth, and certainly central government rhetoric is that. But up to sometimes, I think research has shown that up to a third of businesses don't want to grow. However, they do need to be more productive. So the language that we use in terms of support and what we plug people into has to actually reflect who we're talking to. So we very quickly realized this wasn't a one size fits all, and we've put an awful lot of work into linking to these communities, understanding the communities, particularly understanding the role that things like micro businesses, which are very, very, by far the most prevalent business in Cornwall, the role that they play, not only in an economic sense, but in a societal sense in communities as well. So even within villages, micro businesses support each other. The pub supports the garage, and village shops and all this sort of thing. It is very important to the sort of fabric of society to support businesses, not just for economic reasons. There are societal reasons as well. So we needed to understand that. So as time has gone on, we've developed various ways of engagement, but we still find that in communities, penetration in terms of into the market of businesses is still relatively low. And just to give you an example, in phase one, we had 80% of the client businesses we talked to, which was just short of 2,000, 80% of those actually reported no state aid value. So that meant they hadn't engaged with a European project. So we took that as 80% probably were unaware of business support or already engaged in business support, which is a huge number, particularly when there's a lot of support around and it's been around quite a long time. But it shows you the scale of the problem. So I suppose fast forward to now, we at the moment predominantly European funded. Obviously that ends in 2023, and we're working on plans for the future, and certainly, like I say, BEIS are very and government are very keen to continue growth hubs. It's just we don't know how that's going to happen, and I'll leave it there because I've just given you a bit of an overview.
Thank you very much, Stu. That's great. I think I'm going to go straight to the panel on this one. I'm going to pick on Jim McKenna first, please.
Peter, thank you. Stu, thank you, and thank you for giving your time as well, which is much appreciated. I guess I've got a sort of a question which is almost a challenge, really, because we have heard from one or two previous business panelists that they would agree with your assessment that sort of business support and advice has been fragmented, and so it's not always easy to see where the value lies, particularly if you're giving up your time or the time of your employees in terms of development. So I guess my question would be, would you agree? Okay, do you think that, rather than would you agree, do you think that sort of a lot of business support has been more focused on throughput than actual business improvement? Question mark. And secondly, why do you think the growth hubs are better than what might be deemed to be the competition?
Okay. Just to clarify, throughput in terms of kind of, just getting the numbers in rather
in
than
terms of bums on seats, so they get a certificate saying they've attended this, but actually where's the value? Yeah,
okay. So throughput, I'll focus on that one first. That's a really interesting point, actually. So if you certainly when we look at what we're doing and the weekly calls with the growth hubs nationally, there is an awful lot of talk now, and I think we realised this quite early on, that most support, particularly if it's European funded, is based on outputs rather than outcomes. So I would say, if other people are saying that, it's a fair assessment, I think, of there is an element of when you commission a project that is, ultimately publicly funded, you're likely to have outputs that you need to achieve. Now, if those are within European projects, you have certain measures like, you must spend 3 hours talking to the business, or you must spend 12 hours talking to the business. And I think plenty of businesses have reported to us, actually, that they would much prefer it to be outcome based, i.e. it doesn't really matter how long you spend with someone or where you spend the time with someone, but you agree on an outcome at the end of it. So I think that's it's a fair assessment, and it's a really difficult one, because obviously when you're dealing with public money, there needs to be some kind of measurement. But that is something actually that has been fed back, I think, over the last two weeks at least, on the calls with central government. This has become much more prevalent in conversations, which is a good thing, I think. Second part of the question. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
Effectively, what makes growth hub better than the competition?
Okay, so in terms of, at the moment, in terms of competition, we don't provide the actual support. So what we do is take the legwork out of the business for looking for it. So at the moment, there isn't particularly any direct competition in terms of exactly what we do, because we don't provide those specific services. So we don't overlap with the private sector particularly. What we do is facilitate introductions to the support. So actually we complement most projects by doing the initial diagnostic with a business, or a training needs analysis if it's skills, for example, and then we go looking for the right person to help that business. Now, if that is if that's another publicly funded support program, all well and good. If that's the private sector, again, all well and good, but we sort of have to retain our impartiality. So if it's private sector, we tend to facilitate how people might choose. If they wanted an accountant, we'd work with the accountant associations, etc. But it's because we don't directly deliver the support, we're not really in competition.
Okay, thank you. So one final question to follow up, Peter, if I may. How good or otherwise do you think, objectively, the quality of existing business support in Cornwall is? Do you think we are lagging behind other places in terms of quality and value?
I think we're quite different to other places. If I look at interestingly, all LEP areas are very different. I mean, that's deliberate because they're locally run. What we do have in Cornwall is we enjoy a very large business support sector. There are a lot of projects because we are, we enjoy a lot of ERDF or EU funding, ESF funding, that will fund those projects. I think the projects that we've got are, on the whole, they're excellent. They do some great work. What I think my biggest concern is the penetration into the market, i.e., are we working with people who we should be, or are we working with the same people, the same people who know about the support continually come through the system? So for me, the focus has always been on, we have 25, 30,000 businesses in Cornwall, limited companies in Cornwall. I feel, when we looked at our first phase of operation, that we weren't, there were people blatantly there that weren't being hit, were being missed. So we've actually moved much more into a target, we target businesses now, whereas we used to sort of go on an organic marketing campaign. We're moving much more to a focused approach, checking who we're working with against databases we know of, growing businesses, that type of thing. So I think in comparison to other areas, we're very well catered for, but I think we could be a lot more focused about who we work with potentially.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, it is somewhat reminiscent of the conversation we were having earlier this afternoon with Catherine Mead, who was talking about training and access to skills development and so on. And she was saying it's almost pointless there being mediocre skills and training. It needs to be really good and really cutting. And she was talking about particularly being a good employer. And I think she mentioned the skill. I've forgotten the name of the scheme now. Somebody help me. What was the name of the scheme where employers could join in? And
investors in people.
It. Thank you, David.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And she was saying that started out really well, but over the years it sort of faded away a little bit. And I just would sort of encourage you, Stu. I mean, I'm sure you do this anyway. Is that really to aim at excellence all the time, and to really make sure that we're getting that really top end of quality in terms of the advice that we're giving to our businesses. Anyway, right, let's go back to the panel, and we will go to Mike McLenning, please. Councillor Mike McLenning.
Here I go. Thank you, Stu. I'm trying to put all this together, what you've been saying and what other people have been saying on business this afternoon. I'm not saying I'm cleverer than anybody. I just do all right. But I set my own business of being a consultant, a terrible word, to about 25 publishers at one time. And I knew my industry that I was in because I worked in companies. So I set up, and my wife, being a bank manager, she took over the accounts, etc. Now, work was pretty good then because people were still buying magazines. Now with the jobs going, and how much I really want to see jobs come back, but I think I'm on a loser. I think I'm on a loser there. I get an impression listening today that people are thinking I'll go in self-employed and I'll start a company up. Now, my biggest example on that, people think, oh, they won't get much custom from me, but mobile hairdressers. You can only have so many mobile hairdressers, and I wouldn't be a candidate for them with my hair going away. So are people thinking I'll jump on the bandwagon because I've got to find some work, and they're just thinking of an idea, a whim, and not really thought it through, and they think there's a market for it? Because we're going back this afternoon, and my big thing in life is you've got to know there's a marketplace for your product or whatever you're going to try and do. It's all about selling indirectly. Do you think that's an observation that I'm wrong with, or do you think this is happening, that people think, well, I don't know where employment's going to come back to me from, so I've got to think of something, and that's what's puzzling me.
Okay. So after any economic shock, and we saw this in 2008, you get a spike in startups because ultimately a lot of people are made redundant. Some of those will take some kind of financial package potentially and put that into starting a business. So you generally see that after an economic shock. We are certainly seeing, or a lot more calls of people ringing up asking about starting a business, support available for that sort of thing. I think what was very interesting is when we did these town takeovers in phase 1, and before lockdown, I used to spend a couple of days a month where I'd literally walk the streets, pop into businesses, and just ask some questions. I always remain incredibly, I don't want to say shocked, surprised and shocked, I suppose, at the amount of people who do start a business on a whim with no support. And you will walk down any high street and you'll pop into a couple of shops and there will generally be a few of them, at least a few of them. We see it a lot when we have early stage businesses, so maybe of going for a year, coming for support from the Growth Hub, that in terms of the skills that they have to run a business, they are very low level or almost non-existent. And I'm talking about things like basic financial literacy, simple cash flow forecasting, just a plan. And that I think your observation is right, because like I say, if I'm going out talking to people and I find at least a couple, every time I'm out talking to people, there's a lot of them. And what's I think the shame about that is, and it goes back to my point about the sort of penetration into the market, is that actually we're very well catered for in terms of help to people starting a business. Most of the time there's relatively simple steps you can take to be like producing cash flow, producing a bit of a plan, making sure you got a business bank account, all that sort of stuff. So I think you're right. I think every area has exactly that problem. Whether we have more of it in Cornwall or not is probably a moot point, but I think certainly there are a significant amount of people who who maybe move to Cornwall for a lifestyle decision and then start a business based on that's what I wanted to do. Certainly I've talked to a lot of them, a lot of people with that kind of business. So I think that's it is a fair point. It's a very long way of saying that's a fair point.
So there's no easy answer to it, is there? Because some of the meetings we go to, we're being told huge numbers are going to be unemployed in Cornwall. Then you sit at the same meeting, they're saying, oh, we've got to find jobs. So my maths make it a horrendous figure. You're doing your best to put people, the square pegs in the right holes, in their career development or the business they're looking at. But we can't solve everybody's problem because the market's so tight. I mean, the most obvious thing I thought in my lifetime was why estate agents didn't sell properties on a Sunday. Is to close and have someone take you out to view them. So to me, people's leisure time, it made sense. What help do you need then, if you had a wish list from the council to try and push you along on this road? Is there anything the council can do, or is it more because you're being involved with private sector concepts that you've got to be looking down the avenue? I don't really know. You must go at home at night like we do and think, God, how am I going to solve this one tomorrow? So I'd just like to know how you tackle some of the things really on that score.
Stu, hang on. Sorry, from the chair. Right. I don't want to ride over what the question you've just asked, Mike, but we'll come to Stu at the very end after all the questions and ask him that very question.
Okay.
So we're going to ask him for his required interventions at the end. So okay. I don't want to do that before Jane's had the opportunity.
All right, point taken.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So
yeah, enjoyable.
Okay, but I'm sure it'll be good. So Jane, would you like to come forward and have a chat with Stu?
Yes, good afternoon, Stu. I think both Councillor LeBroy, Peter and I have both smiled when you mentioned the extremities of being viewed in Liscard. We spend most of our time at county bobbing up and down and putting our hand up, telling them exactly that. And nobody believes us, do they, Peter? They don't take it on board. So thank you for that. And I think I might have met you in Liscard at an event or two. forgive me if Mike has, in a roundabout way, asked one of these questions. I'm not sure if you have already sort of answered it. But I was going to say, in your experience or opinion, is there a particular section of businesses that need more support than others? And I sort of mean caterers, or just retail, or rural agriculturally related businesses. Is there anything, is there a pattern emerging of a section, and what is the need that is lacking? What is that support they need?
Okay.
That's one question. I'll go on to the next.
Okay, so from our point of view, we deal, I mean, we originally had to deal with we were under sort of ERDF eligibility rules. So we initially didn't work with kind of the agriculture sector, or the primary production sector. So so we kind of work with all sectors. I mean, that's a really interesting question, and I think our data wouldn't suggest there are any particular sectors that are sort of, have more needs than the other. I mean, it almost depends on what's happening at the time, economically. So obviously at the moment, the tourism and hospitality sector are really suffering, and so we've been working with Visit Cornwall and for us, to be honest, it's more about making sure they know that we're here, which is around, I keep coming back to sort of the penetration into the market, but just to make sure that most people, for example, at the moment are, because they're desperately trying to hang on to cash, they're quite focused on the grants. Are there any grants available? Finance, that type of thing. But actually, there are potentially a load of other causal effects that they can get support with that might lead to better cash flow, or the retention of cash, for example. So, if you're not very cash savvy, or you're not very financial savvy, and you're going for a grant, you're potentially gonna get rid of the cash a lot quicker than you were if you maybe had other help in other areas looking at cash flow. So it depends what's going on at the time. I think for us, I think it's geography that seems to be the issue, that where you have micro businesses typically are kind of less well served in almost all aspects of business. I mean, other than being, that they can be quite agile and that type of thing. But, there's a thinner labour market to support them, from a skills point of view. So actually being able to grow and get good people is always going to be a problem. There's less opportunity for building networks, if you're rural, or again at the extremities. So your networks are relatively small to be able to support. And if anything like the compliance of regulation, the smaller you are, you're the owner manager, you have to do everything. You're the marketeer, you're the compliance manager, you're the accountant. So I think as long as, and to be fair, I think within Cornwall, we have got support in the right areas, so we have got a really good, for example, access to finance program where we can refer businesses into you, and they can explore all the financial options for that business. So a lot of the major support areas we have covered. Innovation we're very well catered for as well, where businesses are looking to be more innovative. I think probably one of the issues that we have is that the government is, and this may come back at the end to one of my recommendations, but the government is focused on growth. So we are the growth hub. Everything's about growth. Actually, in the absence of any European funding, the government would only want you to work with growth businesses. But as I said, a lot of businesses don't want to grow. And actually, it's about making businesses more productive. And if you're more productive, you're more likely to survive. But in order to be more productive, the smaller you are, the less likely you are to be able to tap into the necessary interventions that will make you more productive. And that's quite key in terms of the landscape, in the language that you use around growth, because if you talk about growth, you might disconnect with half the business population in Cornwall because they might not want to grow, or they don't link what they're doing with growth. So it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, it's been imposed on us now, of people working from home more and more. So they're working in isolation. Do you think really some of these smaller businesses who can work in a unit, possibly on these things, but they need those networking, that they are actually going to be better off trying to be in a hub, a workspace hub, all in together so they can interact if they want, even if it's only over coffee. Are you anticipating you will have more problems and they will be under the radar if they're working from home rather than being in that situation? And the one other question two questions, which you might be able to tie in with that. When you establish that they may need financial advice or accountancy advice, that sort of thing, do you actually signpost them to Cornish professionals and firms, or are we losing, business out of the county? And then you did sort of mention that the fundamental skills sometimes are lacking, and that they don't really, some people who just set up a business have no knowledge of cash flow, business plans, all that sort of thing. Do you think it would be useful if somewhere in the education, the secondary education, that this sort of bookkeeping, general fundamental things of running a business, bearing in mind we are a county, the Southwest is renowned for having the most small businesses probably in the country. Sorry, that's quite a few questions.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, from a hub point of view, working from home, yeah, I mean that's an interesting one. Obviously, with what's gone on in the world. So we've thought for a long time actually that one of the models we want to pursue is almost to have a presence somehow in every kind of town across Cornwall, to move from actually having a central office in Poole to being actually home based, but go and spend time in the towns and talk to the businesses in the towns and be far more visible. Sorry, that's my dog barking. But a real interesting thing about it, when I was talking about the societal value of micro businesses, is that we probably see, I certainly see it in my village, and we saw it on the town takeovers, that there's probably, the further up you get in government, I don't think there's an appreciation actually of how the value from society of these business networks. So in my village, we're lucky that we have we still have a pub. That's where all the business is done. Okay, so if you go there on a 5 o'clock every night, it's full of tradesmen, it's full of, they're networking. That is something that really, can't be undervalued, because it's so important that if that didn't exist, where would business be done? But if you take that and you extrapolate it up, to a town or that type of thing, these sorts of informal networking opportunities are so important, because that's what makes the world go round. So, you'll go to the pub, there'll be the guy from the garage in there, you're going to put my car in for a that's where stuff happens.